Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Deciphering My Experience. My name is Eric, and I am very happy to have John Warner back today. How you doing today, John?
Not bad.
So you
I'm
just
still in one piece.
you just got back from a trip?
Just a few days in Florida.
Excellent, excellent.
Did not see a UFO. I was very disappointed, but
Well, at least you made it back in one piece with all the chaos that's going on.
yeah.
I wanted to draw your attention today to a topic that you have previously drawn my attention to that I find fascinating, and it's this idea that the battlefields are a sham. That historically, war, as we have been presented, is not as we see it at face value, and that through I guess you can explain how long you think it's been going on for, but that the battlefields might be a place of people being snatched, I guess would be the word that I use. But if we could just jump right in there with maybe the idea of how long you believe or have tracked that you're aware that this has been an activity?
In the last 10 years, I think maybe last 8 years.
Mhm.
But it's not my theory. There are others who have dived into the occult and Enochian magic and Babylon workings, and Crowley, and Rudolf Steiner and George Gurdjieff, all these mystics, and
Totally understood. I just mean yours, as in you presented it to me.
oh yeah, but I think it really took hold as a concept when I was reading Walter Bosley's Empire of the Wheels series books about Aleister Crowley, and he mentioned something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was reading Joseph Farrell's books and others, and just mainstream history books about warfare throughout the ages, it started to click in my head, about the concept of where the dead and missing go. Certainly, a lot of the dead and wounded are buried, and the wounded are treated, but there are instances, if you go back in history, to the Napoleonic Wars and even before that, where they were just like the Roman ledgers for the battle of something, against the Goths or whatever, and they were just, here's the amount of troop casualties we had, here's the, just like today, here's the wounded, and here's the missing. And of course, there's always a few stragglers who defect and go to the other side. That's recorded all throughout history. But it's when you start to combine the works of the occult that it gets a little creepier. And this is one of those things where I did not want to believe it, but I do, because my higher self, or my horse sense says, you need to pay attention to this because you're an idiot if you don't. And so I did. And strangely enough, it does make some weird sense. If you go back even to the American Civil War, there was, Napoleonic tactics, modern weapons, bad combination. There were huge amounts of casualties. And if you go back and look at that, there's always the missing and everything like that. But it wasn't until war was really industrialized. You could say the Franco-Prussian War was maybe the first, but certainly World War I was the biggest, where they just did all this trench warfare with this modern artillery, and they undermined things using explosives. And there were masses of casualties and really, really bad tactics. The Union commanders, as well as the Confederate in the American Civil War, they kind of learned some lessons by the end of the war. All was forgotten by the time World War I came about. Same thing in the Civil War: trench warfare, static warfare,
Mm-hmm.
and gas. Which we think, I.G. Farben, or not I.G. Farben, but Bayer,
Mm-hmm.
which is a precursor of I.G. Farben, was involved in that. Firstly, there's some debate in there whether the British or Germans, and I'm thinking these field marshals and generals really don't seem to be care about, they always talk about the big push in World War I. Oh, the big push on the Somme, and it's like, okay, huge artillery barrage that lasts 3 days, and then the Germans are all hunkered in the bunker, And then the troops march through the no man's land. They open up on the heavy machine guns.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, this is stupid. And there's that recent movie that came out. What was it, about World War One? It was very recently. And everyone called me, all my friends called me, didn't you love it? And I was like, no, it's disgusting. It shows you how stupid. And so when I tell everyone, you got to pull back to 100,000 feet and say,
Right.
okay, what the heck's going on here, Hecker? What's going on?
When I hear you saying this, right, that's the way my brain works, because it seems to me, like I'm writing down notes, it seems to me, because this has been going on for quite some time, I imagine that this isn't a new activity of division in the ranks, so to say. But in some capacity, there had to be ancient sellouts at the time and modern sellouts. I mean, I gather there's a certain percentage of the military forces on the battlefield that do believe that they're there for the said conflict. But then there's got to be some sort of sellouts in the equation that know more than what's going on, because when we get to what you're alluding at, that there's extracurricular activity on the battlefield, some people, like, where are the sellouts in these equations, both modern and ancient?
Well, I think we certainly Atlantis was at war with Lemuria. Atlantis was at war with the Sons of Belial, their own Nazis of the day, which, and I've read Aleister Crowley. I think he mentions that the Sons of Belial, the Nazis are the reincarnated Sons of Belial.
Okay.
And so I believe that. It makes sense because, negativity, low vibration versus high vibrational people, 12,000 years ago or so, right before the Great Flood, the Earth was at the nadir of the Great Cycle of 26,000 years. So we were at the low point of vibration.
Okay.
And the accounts I've read far and wide say, well, this is when the bad guys find a toehold. And they're like, aha. And I think what happened was they maybe barely won that war. I think it was a shit show for all sides, comet impacts, Atlantis was destroyed, flood. That pretty much wiped out most everyone. But it certainly created, I think, an environment for the darkness to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get to the Anunnaki kings like Nebuchadnezzar and all these things. There's nothing but wars back then. Nothing but wars. I remember in high school, it was just like we went from one war to the next.
Mm-hmm. And in the grand scheme of big picture timelines, you're discussing geological catastrophes at a point in space, which is not the only time where folks with things happening.
Right.
So just because Earth was in a catastrophic situation doesn't mean there wasn't other places for things to be occurring either, lest we break out of that small-mindedness as if the only thing ever going on is what's on this blue marble in space.
Yeah, I mean, you hear people talk about the Lyran wars against the reptilians out in space that have been going on for 1 billion years. And by all accounts, everyone, who's into that side of the equation, and it says, these wars are still going on hot, and we're just sort of a sideshow, like, Guadalcanal. And I liken it to Guadalcanal because it's a slog. And our history is nothing but soaked in blood.
Mm-hmm.
And so where I think this is what happens is, the Anunnaki, the gods, Moloch, everyone's sacrificing virgins and their children and all this stuff. And that's gone on till today. But that may not have provided enough, vril energy, loosh, blood, you name it, for those who have a taste for it on a grand scale. And so what I think might be going on is that in addition to all that, human sacrifice, Babylon workings, stuff going on is they've maximized wars. And I say they, the Anunnaki, the other regressives out there in space.
Whatever factions benefit from this type of activity.
The royal bloodlines. I mean, my God, I was watching Catherine the Great. It's a Russian program. And it was like you had to fight for your life every single day if you lived in a palace, if you were a princess or a duke. I mean, people were after you with daggers and poison and worse.
This reminds. I used to say, I've been saying this for years, and I know it sounds more common nowadays because people's brains go there, but this is something I've been saying for years, is that there's a shadow thing going on, right? And imagine it's thousands of years ago, right? And you're King John and I'm King Eric, and we have neighboring kingdoms. Simple thought, right? I'm in my castle, you're in your castle. My peasants bring me my things and keep me fat, and your peasants are doing the same thing.
Yeah, but I want your peasants, and I want your gold and your castle.
Not really. You and I are pals. Everything's great. We have no problems with each other. We go golfing on the weekends. Everything's awesome as far as you and I know. But as far as our peasants know, they just have work to do. And then eventually, if things are flourishing in the community and my kingdom is thriving, it might get to the point where those peasants are so not preoccupied that they start wondering about me and my lethargy and all the tithings they have to give to me. At which some point in time, my right-hand man will come to me and say, hey, there's the village is getting a little crazy out there. It's about that time, I think. Oh, it's about that time, huh? Yeah. Send my curry over to King John. I go, John, my peasants are getting a little kooky again. Oh, I just noticed mine are getting a little kooky too. Yep. War! And then next thing you know, I throw a couple of uniforms from my guys over in your direction, and you guys burn down one of your own villages, leave some of my uniforms there, and blame my guys and stuff like that. And I just figured that this type of war and purging, at the very least, was political. That's where my brain went. And I can see that. But now you're bringing it a step further, because it's almost like you're saying that not only is that going on, but these kings can actually profit, because there could be a third party involved that is like, you know what this war could be worth to you guys?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so most wars are political, but and sometimes religious. But I think a lot of that is an excuse. I mean, if you go back to World War I, Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. So what? The reason the war started more than anything is because big industry and other nations had all these new toys and ships, and they were getting into aircraft soon in 1913 or whatever, 14, and they were itching to go to war, just itching. And certainly Tsar Nicholas had to keep his peasants occupied because they had been grumbling for decades. With assassins and things like that. And so, a war stirs up patriotism and nationalism and things like that. And it's like, God is on our side. I always love that one. God is on our side. Or, those people worship a different God. Let's kick their ass. It's any excuse under the sun. But I think at the top levels, the kings and queens, the royals, the elite, they're making backdoor deals with scumbags. Interdimensional, whatever, whoever, pick a regressive, any regressive, certainly the Anunnaki never left. And so the deal is, you want to win this war? Okay, bring us the most casualties. Now, that's just a theory of mine, but certainly there are others who have thought along these lines. It's horrifying. We got enough horror to deal with anyway in the whole disclosure arena. But this is something I don't think we should turn away from, because, I mean, look how big the American military, industrial, intelligence, corporate complex is, and the many trillions needed to fund it. Something big is going on. People, there's no secret space program. It's like, I beg to differ, because you can't spend that much money on antiquated aircraft carriers, and they keep it. I'm subscribed to two military channels. And it's like, look at the new fighter coming out. I'm like, jet engines are a 1930s technology. Don't give me this. Sure, optical invisibility, the F-35, that's the hat trick.
I've been to the ice cube neutrino detector at the South Pole, and I am a tradesman, and I'm familiar with materials and labor. And when people hear the bill for what that structure is tagged out at, it is some god awful number. It's at like $500 billion for that facility or something.
And who knows if that's true?
Correct. I mean, correct. Absolutely. And it's a lot of it was just melting ice. So I mean, it's not a lot of structure there.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when Catherine Austin Fitz was interviewed, I think by Daniel List or someone, she's like, I just stopped counting at some point. I believe that's what she said. I certainly don't want to put words in her mouth, but I respect her work and her findings. And she's like, at a certain point, you just got to stop counting.
Yeah.
Because she's just finding more and more black drains where all this cash is going down. And she can only estimate, you know, that since I think World War II, there's a missing probably 30 trillion, but who knows how many trillions it's been. I mean, it could be quadrillions because we're not sure what the GDP of the United States really truly is. I know it's more than what they say it is.
You remember what the headline was on September 10th?
Yeah.
On the,
yeah.
oh, 2.3
sorry.
trillion missing from the DOD.
Yeah, and then and Reuters came out with an article. I've got a clipping of it if you want it. And
that's amazing.
The Army says they lost 2.3 trillion. You know, this is later. 2000.
That was one of the most amazing two steps that I've ever seen put right before people's very eyes. Day one, September 10th, we lost $2.3 trillion. Oops, our bad. The next day, we're going to need another check for shitloads of money. And you guys will write that for us, right? Yeah, no problemo.
Right. And so, but getting back to the original topic of the occult, I think Walter Bosley wrote in his, I'm pretty sure he did, in one of the books I read, and he said Aleister Crowley, you know, he was the foremost occultist of the 20th century, I think, bar none. You know, he worked for all sides. He was a double, triple agent, you know.
Yeah.
He was only working for Crowley.
Yeah, I was going to say he was all about himself.
Right. And so what I think Crowley found, and this is just my view, at the end of his life, you know, he teamed up with Jack Parsons. He was feeding him, you know, step-by-step Enochian magic rituals. Jack Parsons was kind of a beer-drinking womanizer, you know, a brilliant guy, but he kind of fucked it all up and never got it.
He had his vices that could be manipulated.
Right. And so there's a rumor going around that in 46 or 47, they did a Babylon workings together at the site of Area 51, which I think was an ancient site. The Indians, I know the Native American tribes in the area viewed it as sacred. And that's where a lot of these DUMs and military bases are. They're built over these sacred sites, which really pisses off, you know, all the Southwest Native American tribes to no end. But of course, they don't get much of a voice. And so there were probably, according to David Adair, he said there were huge ancient tunnels going every which way, you know, under Area 51 and S4 and Indian Springs. You know, there's tons of real estate down there. And so I believe that story. It makes sense. But, you know, I think what happened to Crowley was at the end of his life, in his deathbed, he said, I am most bewildered. Because what I think he found out was that no matter how precise his rituals were and how devoted he was to revering these regressive ET gods, or, you know, whoever you want to call them, and he drew one that looked just like a gray alien. You can see those drawings. They're in his, you know, probably find them on the internet. I think he found out that they were really using him. And they were like, we got a sucker this time. You know, John D. Oh yeah, he was great. You know, and everything like that. And, you know, but we really got a live one with Crowley. And he did all kinds of work for, you know, for his proxy masters in the shadows. And they were just using him. And so they used him up by the end of his life. I think he was a heroin addict and a broken man. And he tried everything to, you know, and a lot of people have come forward, spiritual people, and they said, oh yeah, Crowley's still active and wherever in, you know, higher dimension, which is probably true. You know, he's like, well, I still want to work for the bad guys, you know. And I write it in my book that Churchill meets with him. And the rumor is that Churchill did meet with him. You know, Crowley was working for Crowley, but if you know, what he was paid with other than money, I'm not sure. But I think he had a hand, personally, I think he had a hand, not only in World War I, but World War II, in maximizing, you know, as a double agent, triple agent, he'd say, well, listen, Mr. Churchill, maybe you should do this. And I see the probabilities in my, you know, my scrying tablet, you know, which he had. I wrote that he has John Dee's scrying tablet. Churchill liberated it from the museum to give to him in my book to see. And they're talking about a smaller thing with my characters. But I think Crowley was manipulated by people in the shadows, regressives, for sure. And the more deaths, occurred in the war, certainly on the Russian front. I mean, Joseph Farrell says it and others say it. I mean, the official word from Putin is 27 million. Yes, starvation and disease played a part, but come on. I mean, how do you kill that many people?
I am curious
It's closer to 30 million. I think Igor Witowski says it's probably 30 or 33 million is the real.
in
The
your
Allies
research,
barely lost 1 million casualties.
could you put a finger on any data that would state that in history was the most catastrophic event? Like when we're talking, like if these are scheduled events for like a loose gathering, then straight up loss of life in mass in a short period of time, I imagine, is the goal. Is there anything historically that seems to be the greatest event, so to say? Because it just makes me wonder what that time period would be and what's going on and who was answering to who then,
In ancient times, we never saw, I mean, you saw great casualties, but it's got to be World War One.
Okay.
I mean, it was just a pig slaughter.
Okay.
I mean, guys died for nothing. They
Understood.
put new recruits in the trenches. They blew a whistle and up, Gallipoli, the movie Gallipoli. They blew a whistle and they went up, full kit, gear, training, everything, and just mowed down by machine guns.
Yeah, it was my understanding, from the limited studying I've done in World War I and the technologies, is that they had advanced the ability to defend positions so much further than the ability to move at something offensively that, it was just like you said, defensive positions would just mow people down for days.
Yeah, and gas. I mean, that was just horrific. Now, Hitler was blinded, or he had hysterical blindness by gas attacks twice. He got the Iron Cross. The guy may have been a sadistic madman, but he wasn't a coward. J.P. Farrell says there's a document that exists in the Swedish embassy, and it makes sense to me that, Stalin didn't communicate with Hitler directly. Stalin communicated through the Swedish embassy and said, there's a telegram that says, look, if you use those weapons, plural, again, we're going to unleash our entire biological and chemical warfare stockpile in one fell swoop. Now, I don't know if the Germans really, but Hitler was blinded by gas, whether hysterical or otherwise. It was a horror in the trenches. I think he probably relented. He didn't care about gassing his own people, that's for damn sure. But he cared about the Aryan women, children, and the regular German people. I think he really did. And I think this time he relented. And of course, the rumors of German crude, dirty bombs and, using thorium and uranium and other things blown up in trucks, and maybe the big Gustav gun, that's a debate. We'll have to, I don't know. We'll have to figure that out as we go. It does make sense. And certainly the Russians, and there's no wonder the Russians had these penal battalions. You saw in the movie Enemy at the Gates, they were shooting the people were treating. Yeah, the Russians weren't cowards. I think that's been aggrandized and exaggerated in movies and other things. I think those Russian soldiers, they knew they were going to get shot if they were treated, so why do it? They really cared about protecting their women and children in the motherland. So you had to have a really scary weapon other than just a Tiger tank, maybe, or a few Mark IVs, or whatever it is, German troops, and certainly their machine guns were rapid fire. And I don't see it. I think that happened on small scale, but I think these penal battalions, which were told to march through minefields, maybe, but it sure makes sense if you've got thermobaric air fuel bombs launched en masse in those Nebelwerfer rocket canisters that the Germans had a shit ton of. And you see them in films, the Russians used them too. But, I think the Germans use coal dust in those things. And it's, you can look up a modern fuel air bomb explosion on YouTube. It's like a small tactical nuke. With no radiation. And so what I think they cobbled together most likely is they put together a crude uranium, thorium, beryllium, who knows, type of crude device with explosives, put it in a truck, or left it in a tank or whatever, and the advancing Soviet battalions were just, blown apart. Something like that was going on, and certainly we're not going to get the truth out of the Russians because they're ashamed of it. They shouldn't be, but and certainly you're not going to get for the Germans because we got all the German intelligence into the CIA. General Galen, the Ostfront, and so it does make sense. But going back to the mass death ritual, I think there's something to that. So let's go. Wait, go ahead.
It makes me wonder also in the idea of this being an occulted tradition, and that there were sellouts, both modern and ancient. So it makes me think on the battlefield that that there still could have, like, since there's going to be this third party interaction. I also wonder if there were, because we've seen double and triple agents and things like that, right? Would there have been times too that, let's say, somebody would then try to maybe take advantage of the third party person in the middle of this activity? And then maybe in some of those things might be some of the times where we acquired tech.
Yeah. I mean, I think, wars are multi-purpose. I mean, you go back into history, it's political, it's religious, it's a way to keep your people occupied. It's a way of producing esprit de corps in an officer class. There's a multitude of reasons. War is a racket. It's
things are, yes.
Money, the guys making the, flintlock muskets and, arquebuses and other things, those guys are making the tradesmen,
It doesn't seem like a stretch in my mind. Like, I imagine, like, let's just say it's nowadays, full contemporary tactics and folks involved. And let's just say there's a war going on and there's bad people selling out some of our people contemporarily, and they turn to one of our guys and they'll go, hey, when we're discharging our folks to them, just grab one of the boxes off of their ship, just whatever you can get.
Sure.
Why wouldn't that stuff happen?
Yeah, why not? Because it's multi-purpose. So if a king meets with some regressive bad guys, it's like, sure, take as many of the dead and missing as you want. I don't care as long as I win. And they're like, okay, we'll see, and maybe we'll grant you a wish. Oh, genie, the jinn, whatever it is, and certainly it makes sense because. You get a lot. The winners get a lot out of war, and the losers get jack squat. So it's not. There's always got to be a winner and loser, and so there's this energy transfer, and it's almost kind of torsion-like. It in my mind, it's this energy transfer. Oh, you lost, and you have 500,000 missing. Great. Oh, you won and you have 500,000 missing? Great. Somebody makes out like the mob on both ends. Or hedge fund managers.
It makes me think of like the stock market, quite simply. You hear it all the time, like the stock market tanks, right? And everyone, oh, I lost money on. Everyone's losing money on. No, like, it doesn't disappear. It didn't burn. It didn't disintegrate. All of that money went to someone.
Yeah.
It did, like some folks are doing great on that day.
Yeah. And people who came up with, strange derivatives and hedge funds and all that.
So it makes me think of that, like on the battlefield, like all of a sudden, like, yes, we lost all these people. Well, did we really lose them?
Yeah. And so it's not a pleasant thought, given that we've got enough on our plate in the disclosure arena already. But unless we really start to look at all the hard stuff with a very careful eye, it's just going to compound. And the other, if you fast forward to Vietnam, I talked to a guy that I know. I only know his first name, but I know he's a military guy. I can tell. And I talked to a lot of these guys. And this is one of the wounded veterans that we had at our farm for that event. He turned me on to this guy. He's like, you and my friend should talk. And I said, that's fine. I always like to talk to veterans. And so I'm talking with him, and he's like, think I mentioned this before in an interview with you, and he said, look, I was in Nam in 66, and I was with a Ranger battalion. Mm-hmm. And we were, he's like, I'm not going to say we had some special training, but we had special training, and, the concept of UFOs and aliens was broached in that training. And I said, I understand, I understand. This is 66. Mm-hmm. And he said, my battalion went into the jungle somewhere close to the Laos border. Mm-hmm. That they were going back and forth, Cambodia and Laos. Mm-hmm. Everyone thinks it's Vietnam, but the whole 3 countries were just warfare everywhere. Mm-hmm. And he said, we were probably in Cambodia somewhere. And he's like, I don't remember the mission, but I remember I was one of the 20, I don't know how many guys that survived, but the rest of them were gone. And I said, well, were they casualties? What happened? Taken prisoner? He's like, no, they just simply vanished. And we went back looking for them with another unit and everything, and they were just gone. Mm-hmm. Now, he said he saw a lot of weird things, and he definitely saw UFOs in Vietnam. They were all over the place.
Okay.
And he's like, I don't know what happened. Now, another story, and I can't remember where I read this, but it might have been Richard Dolan or one of his books or someone else's book. But there was a unit sent, an Air Force unit, combat unit, sent to retrieve the bodies of a B-52 bomber that went down over North Vietnam from a SAM missile. And they got to the wreckage, and there were gray aliens there taking the bodies away. And they actually shot at them.
Huh.
And, oh, yeah.
Our guys shooting at the grays?
You better believe it, because whatever Air Force unit this was, they were not trained in this.
Okay.
And they didn't know what these things were or who these people were. And so there was some combat going back and forth.
Okay.
And in that same story, one of the guys says he was taken underground there somewhere in North Vietnam. And the Greys had a facility there, an underground base. Mm-hmm. And they were doing, genetic this, that, and the other with not only dead soldiers, but with live personnel. Mm-hmm. And so when I read that, that was a long time ago I read that. That really disturbed me. Mm-hmm. And there are other reports by soldiers of strange spider-type beings in the jungle, bodies piled in ziggurat pyramid fashion. Like, who the hell would do that 50 feet high? And they sound like, ghost stories or whatever, combat stories, but not when put in conjunction with what you and I know, and Penny and everybody else, and James Rink and all these other people going, oh no. Mm-hmm. And I started to piece the Aleister Crowley and the John Dee and the Occult and Enochian magic and all this stuff. And, the regressive people that have skin in the game. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I see a disturbing trend, series of dots that are connecting on their own. And I don't think there were a lot of personnel in Vietnam who knew this was going on. I think there were probably maybe 100 guys or less. But they had, they were CIA or who knows what uniform they wore. It doesn't matter. They're just guys that are in the projects, black project guys out there and going, look, we need to take this, take this objective, and this is what we need to trade. Send your guys here. And I'm sure the generals and colonels were like, what the fuck are we doing there? That's Charlie has tunnels. We're never going to, and they're like, just do it. Mm-hmm. And this happens. 100, 300 guys just disappear. No gear, no guns, no nothing. That's what this guy said. Mm-hmm. Nothing. And then when he went back to Vietnam, I think he told me, and the retirees, Vietnam vets, retirees are moving to Vietnam. You heard that?
Not so.
They're moving back to Vietnam.
Okay.
It's inexpensive.
Okay.
The people are friendly. The food is amazing, and the climate and the beaches are fantabulous. And so I had no idea until I looked this up. And this guy said, oh, no, I went back with a group of vets and we talked to our Vietnamese counterparts. And they were like, yeah, we've had missing too, because this guy who went down into the underground base, he said it was, Vietnamese and American personnel with the Greys. So they were not, they were indiscriminate. Mm-hmm. And so they couldn't get an answer out of the Vietnamese guy. Said, yeah, we had the same problem. Guys would just disappear. And we figured you guys captured them. And we were like, no. And so, piece that group of dots, uncomfortable dots together. And I thought this dovetails into Crowley's mentioning that wars are a mass death ritual.
Yeah,
I don't remember if Bosley concluded that or it was based on Crowley's information, but somewhere in that mix in Bosley's books, he purports that, and I thought, my God, this is huge.
And certainly,
this isn't just a few people. This is millions and millions.
Right. When you're talking about these numbers, it's certainly never been something I've ever noticed on the American side, specifically to like the Vietnam War. I don't recall ever seeing things like, 1,000 or 2,000 Vietnamese prisoners being taken at once. Like that didn't seem to be like an activity. I imagine if that was going on, that would be newsworthy, that at the time of the war, oh, we've captured 2,000 prisoners today. But that didn't ever seem to be getting reported. So I don't imagine they were doing the same thing on the other side either. It makes sense. This whole disappearing thing is being a reciprocal process that we're both just losing folks. I was really shocked to hear that they would happen so fast in the missing. Like I grew up with POW, MIA flags and stuff like that. I remember seeing them, and I just always thought of MIA as 100 dudes go out and one goes missing. Yeah, that was the way my brain was looking at it. But now to hear that it's the reverse, it's like it really, really changes things, and a lot now, actually. It changes my perspective a lot because I grew up in a extremely veteran community. So the Palmia flags and shirts and the bikers and stuff, it was a huge thing. So now in a way I look at all of them differently because I feel like they were in the know. They understood what that MIA part meant and I did not.
Yeah, I thought it was just, and the rumors of guys still living in North Vietnam, I'm sure there's one or two or three guys who did that and said, screw this. I don't want to fight for America. I just want to live in Vietnam in peace. Right. I'm sure there were a few guys that did that. But come on, General Haig, you're too young to remember the Vietnam War on the news, but every night my dad, I was a kid, my dad made me watch the news every single night. And so the Vietnam War, and I'm in the Pentagon and, I'm witnessing the arguments. Dad would have Admiral Zumwalt and everybody in his office arguing about the Vietnam. And Dad had a painting of an American POW being led blindfolded and his hands tied behind his back with Vietnamese, regulars behind him. I'll never forget that painting. It was in his. I was so sad as a kid. I was hearing about John McCain being beaten because Dad knew John McCain, and but I think. They lied to us. We know now, and my dad said so. We talked about the Vietnam War a lot, and he's like, your hippie mother was right. The war was bad. They lied to us about the Gulf of Tonkin. That was bullshit, false flag operation, and the numbers of dead and missing and body counts. The big deal was enemy body count. But they lied about all that stuff.
Right? Everything. Yeah. What do you even do with those numbers? Like in my head, I was just thinking, I wonder what the actual count was. What do they record for actual missing in the Vietnam War? And I was thinking, I'm like, well, that's not like what's going to be the accurate number there anyway.
I don't know. Somebody must have a website that gives a number of missing from the war. The war went on a long time. 61, we had advisors in there with Kennedy.
Right, yeah. When did it actually start? Like I know that it was officially in the mid-'60s, but that we had activities going on for quite some time.
Yeah. Here's something, this is sort of an aside, but here's something that most people don't realize. Kennedy was assassinated for a million reasons. But JFK was also, when he was a young congressman, in 1952, he went to Vietnam to view the French. Because America wanted France and NATO. And so we were giving them World War II weapons and everything they needed to fight this war of insurgency. And he witnessed the folly of it. And his report to Congress, I think in 53, was like, this is unwinnable. The French are fools. They're fighting a guerrilla warfare with, trails and underground tunnels and God knows what else. Most people don't remember that John Kennedy had gone to Vietnam as a younger man. He knew it was folly. So, of course, the military-industrial complex wanted to go into Vietnam, big money, and they did. whether, that was one of the other reasons he was assassinated, amongst many others. You know, it's, but when I started to piece this together, and it's just sort of maybe a few of us, I think Bosley probably understands it, Farrell, maybe a few others. It's not pretty to think about. And it's very, when I see those MIA guys, they come into DC every year, with the Harleys on Memorial Day. And it's like, God, I don't want to be the one to break it to Vietnam vets that this is what happened, that to their MIA buddies was dead or alive. Some of these guys ended up on the table or cut up into chunks or sold on some galactic black market.
Not for nothing. Those guys can take it, I imagine. They would probably just rather have closure.
Right.
I'm sure they can understand that there was an additional enemy on the battlefield. I bet you they can wrap their head around that logic.
I'm sure there's some Vietnamese veterans and some American veterans in Vietnam on a beach somewhere drinking beer and going, I saw this UFO, and all of a sudden 20 of my guys disappeared.
Hell yeah.
I'm sure they're discussing that in private. But I'm going to say it publicly. I think it's war is more of a racket than we think. It's like, sure, everyone makes money, but guess who, really gets a lot of, genetics and, God forbid, knows, I don't know what else from all that, those missing.
The idea of this works in my head because it makes more sense of the motives of war than what we're currently presented.
Yeah.
Because you're right. There's really no reason for us to line up on sides of the field in mass and at the end of the day just have piles of dead bodies. Like, who does benefit from that? And if we can start look to a process that shows motives and benefits and then follow them back to the sources, it's just like fighting crime. They say follow the money. It's the same darn thing. It's just we're realizing that war is more of a criminal activity than just a happenstance of bad politics.
Yeah, and it was probably an agreement by both sides in Vietnam, I'm guessing, at the top levels. But there's one more piece of tantalizing evidence. Do you remember that movie in the 90s, I think it was, about the guy, I think the movie was called Taken or something. It was a pretty good movie. He was taken aboard a ship, and he saw all the human bodies in this sort of gel stasis. Do you remember that movie?
The movie's ringing a bell. The name is not, but I'm remembering like this.
Wrong. But he was, in Washington State, and they were woodsmen, and he got beamed up on this craft, and his buddies.
Oh, I know I know the movie you're talking about. I can remember the movie cover, like the beam of light lifting his body up.
I think that, and then there was a Christopher Walken movie about being on board a UFO. Now, I believe it's in one of those two. He comes upon inside the craft. There's like 25 dead soldiers, and I think it was in the book version that I read. And it's the guy was like, "What are these soldiers doing here?" And the Gray said to him, "Oh, they're dead. So we're just gonna give them, I don't know, a proper burial or their time. They agreed to it in some sort of soul contract or some bullshit that, a gray alien would say, because, gray aliens are not to be trusted. They're regressives. Even Richard Dolan, there's thousands of reports of being abductions. And so that's another piece of evidence of this puzzle was in that book written by that guy. He saw dead soldiers on board the craft. And I think I've read other reports where people have seen inside craft soldiers from another era, like Civil War. And it's like, what are these guys in Civil War costumes doing here? And it's like, oh no, they were on the battlefield. We just scooped them up. Fair's fair. So time, the time, it doesn't matter. Space travel is time travel. So you could swoop back to any war and scoop up the dead as long as it doesn't mess up the timeline. Because the regressives and the positives are all manipulating these timelines, and they don't want to fuck them up too bad. So they want to take the dead and the missing, and it's just, it doesn't affect the timeline because, probably there's some sort of cosmic entanglement, quantum entanglement going on here.
It sounds to me like that this would be a side activity from what would be what I'm presuming would be the initial Loosh gathering, which should be at the time of demise, that there's something going on when the people are dying, right? Yeah. to collect that energy, I guess. But now it sounds like that if you're saying post-mortem, that the bodies also have value, it sounds like, that this is now a commodity of some sort?
Yeah, I mean, according to all the super soldiers, pretty much, they say you can be reanimated if you're not dead too long.
Okay, that's true too.
Go on a spaceship and they got a room full of green slime tanks. You can regenerate anybody.
10-4, so they could also be so they could be regenerating them. That's the list of what you can do with the commodity, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. For some, it's food. Sadly, lions, tigers, and bears. You know, I mean,
right.
It makes as above, so below. You know,
something wants to eat us for sure.
Yeah, if the flesh is from a dead body, what does it matter? As long as it's still relatively fresh, you can use the genetics. Or I don't know, maybe it can be a year old. I don't know. Emery Smith talks about that, dissecting chunks of alien extraterrestrial samples, and he thinks a lot of them were killed in the room down the hall.
If there's any aliens out there like the Italians that I knew from New York, if they have basements, there's going to be some humans hanging in the basement being dried to like a fine aged.
It's
like
prosciutto. This is horrifying, but there's no death. I mean, I'm fully convinced we reincarnate. The soul moves on. If it's true that we've all signed these soul contracts after our last lives, I was probably a janitor, and so, I want to do this. And it's like, well, you're going to end up as chunks of meat on board a spacecraft somewhere. And it's like, it's all right.
But I want to be a race car driver.
Else. Yeah. Or, they have technology to capture the soul, which would suck. But then that might last a long time. But I think eventually, since our souls never die, they're infinite. What does it matter? I mean, I think it would suck if you and I are we got their souls, and we spent many thousands of years working for the bad guys. Okay, well, but at the end of it, it's like, well, that was an interesting experience. What do you want to do now? I don't know. I want to be a giant dolphin, on this water planet. It's kind of, I think there's some of that going on where, I've had some horror in my life, and it's like, geez, close to death, or I wanted to take my own life. I've been there, the bottom of the well, and it's just like, wow, why would I have agreed to any of this? And it's like, well, you're not going to learn jack if you haven't had several dark nights of the soul. You need to tongue that bottom of the well, and there's nothing but black. Ugh. Yep. It's the worst of the worst in the universe. Unless you tongue that,
in a way, yeah. It's like if you haven't experienced rainy days, you'll never appreciate the value of a sunny day.
Yeah, in spades.
Right.
And I've never been in combat, but I've seen people die, and whether on the racetrack or otherwise. But I lost my fear of death, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's stupid," and it's like, no, I just believe in reincarnation. It's not stupid.
Yeah, they believe this is over. You don't believe this is the end.
Yeah. So what? I mean, they're going to come after you. I've had warnings. They're going to come after you, the deep state, and kill you. And it's like, so what?
Right.
Knock yourself out. I'll see you in the next life, and the next, and the next, and the next. And I'm going to be nipping at their heels.
Yep.
It doesn't matter if someone wants to blow you away. Karma's on them. I'm going to try to make it through this life without harming anyone. I was a rugby player for 5 years in college, and my wife asked me one night, she's like, God, you were this giant, I used to rip doors off hinges. I was like 240 pounds. And she's like, how many fights have you been in your life? And I thought about it, and I was like, none. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't think of, I've stood up for myself. I've gotten in between people. I've been really close. There's been shoving and pushings and yelling, but I've never slugged anybody. And it's like, I couldn't believe it. When I really searched my memory, I could not remember a fight. I've been with like 2 girls, and like 20 guys are like, I'm going to kill you. And somehow I talked my way out of it, Eric Hecker style. Oh, wait a minute. She's crazy. And
Oh, I do the best. I always try to de-escalate, but I cannot lie. More often than not, I would just get punched in the face.
Yeah,
And I wasn't an instigator. I think I've only started one fight in my life.
yeah. I mean,
Start's a relative term. It
when I
was
was a young
actually finishing a
teenager,
verbal thing. But either way, I'm not a violent person, but I see what you're saying. It's like, it is weird to me for folks to have gotten so far in life, especially like a big guy, because people start with big guys.
yeah.
It just happens.
Before I was 17, I was not a big guy. I wasn't six. I grew to 6'1" and pretty big, but even that, the teenage brawls and the bullies picking on you and punching you, that's still loosh gathering.
Oh, interesting.
That's still violence.
Okay.
When someone says to someone, you're fat or you're stupid or you're this religion or you're that religion or some racial comment, that's still, oh man, it's like guys in Vegas, they're just counting the pennies. Oh, and 5 more cents. This is how the regressives have ordered this planet, the human race, at least for the last 12,000 years, is to get every little dime's worth of loosh out of everything.
Well, then I think I grew up in a loosh factory community by design.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I just,
I was talking with someone recently. I don't know if you might get a kick out of this, being in the writing industry now and a historian. Do you remember the comic strip The Lockhorns? It was a very famous comic strip. It was a couple that were just arguing a lot.
Vaguely,
The Lockhorns.
Yeah.
And that comic strip was the comic strip was based on a couple from Levittown, Long Island. That was the idea.
Oh, I know where. Yeah.
So that was the tension built up, and it was supposed to be indicative of what life was like in your standard household in Levittown, Long Island.
Yeah, it's just programming. Comic books. Richie Rich saves the world. Yeah, right. I guarantee you, Richie Rich is. His father's using him in Babylonian rituals and abusing him. It's all programming. I mean, my favorite cartoon in the '60s when I was a kid was Johnny Quest. Well. The old episodes have all been edited because they were like shooting people all over the place.
Oh, I didn't even realize.
Going, dying, and it's like, oh my gosh, we got to edit this out. There's a whole guy at a website on Johnny Quest. He's like, they've cut like 5 minutes out of these old cartoons because they're so violent.
Oh, that's funny.
Well, when I was a kid, I had guns, violent toy soldiers, weapons.
Yeah.
If it shot something out of a barrel, I had it. I mean. And I grew into real guns, and
think about how cool people are. Think about how cool people are nowadays with suspending second grade boys for bringing a stick to school that's shaped like a gun and going pow 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 pow. Now that's a horrible offense that can be attended to.
Everyone thinks this politically correct stuff is helping, but I think that's another agenda. Obviously it's not. It's just pitted more people against each other to divide and conquer us.
I'm fairly certain that when I was a child, I remember I had this really cool vest that I liked because it had inside pockets, and every chance that I had a cap gun that had caps in it, there was a cap gun in that pocket, and I rode my bike to school. And I mean, come on, that was worse off than a stick. But I would have been like thrown in jail for that nowadays if I pulled out a cap gun and started firing that thing off.
Yeah, I mean, the worst weapon that's ever been made, in my opinion, at least for Americans, is the BB gun. It's not a real firearm, but boy, you can do some damage with it. And I found out the hard way as a kid. I mean, if it had a bullet in it, I respected my father, and I would go to the proper shooting range we had at the farm and everything. But a BB gun, I treated it as a toy. And I shot out windshields. I mean, a whole windshield will crack if you hit it in the right place. I brought it to school and shot out windows. My friend borrowed it and shot me with it. I was wearing a coat, but still, you could shoot an eye out or whatever like that. It is the worst thing. It's a way to get young boys since, I don't know, the 20s or 30s, whenever it was invented, as a stepping stone to firearms. And it is absolutely horrendous. I tell my friends with kids, I don't ever give them a BB gun, or a pellet gun. They don't respect it like a real firearm, and they will get in trouble, and they can hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're straying off topic, but it
No,
shows you.
I follow your logic 100%. I remember running around in the sumps, the rain basin catches and stuff,
Yeah.
and we had BB guns, and we'd be doing BB gun wars, and then next, it would start out with, all right, one pump only. You can only do one pump. There's one pump, and then next thing you know, you hear someone in the bushes like pumping away, like, you little bastards, and then you just hear everybody doing it, and then next thing you know.
They have CO2 powered, fully automatic BB guns.
Yes.
Full auto, like 1,200 rounds a second or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's just insane.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, this whole thing with the violence.
It's a program. They're apparently amping it up as a program.
Yeah.
That we start out.
It's been there forever,
mm-hmm.
since the BB gun. I think it just this irresponsible use of firearms. And my dad was very strict with me, but the BB gun thing, I didn't listen to him,
mm-hmm.
and I got in big trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the only time where I was punished where I agreed with it,
mm-hmm.
because I was like, "That's it, no more BB guns." And I remember one of my college fraternity brothers had one, and he was shooting outside the window, and I grabbed it and destroyed it. I paid him $100. Here's $100. Don't use these things. Learn from my mistakes. And anyway. But
well, if only we could all learn from the mistakes of others, John. But that's why I have the website, and that's why we chat, because we bring everybody's experiences to the table, hopefully for the benefit of the masses, before they get marched into battlefields and flown away in UFOs.
Yeah, I mean, wars are just senseless now. I mean, they keep them on the boil in the Middle East. Everyone knows now why. It's just not only it's religious and political, but there's underground facilities or ancient Anunnaki technology all over the place. Portals, stargates, energy sites. I think they tested Project Looking Glass one time. I have it in my notes. They tested it over a buried temple in Abydos.
Mm-hmm.
And they must have done it at night, and but there were, it was U.S. Army.
That's a project that I'm very interested in as well. What would be your thoughts on Project Looking Glass? How would you explain that to someone?
Oh, forget it. I mean, I heard your interview with Johnny, and it's like, good luck talking to anyone about this. It's taken me 30 years to slowly have the uptake of information and piece it all together, and it's still,
this is a hard one for me, because like you said, you heard me talking with Johnny, the topic of time travel comes up.
Yeah, and that one really blew me away. I don't know about you, but
I'm comfortable with it. I'm actually it's for me, I guess it's a weird thing. To me it explains a lot more of our problems that we have collectively right now when we add into the mix that time travel is there. It's part of the equation. But the problem is trying to explain that to other people, because I do realize that my acceptance of it is, I guess, premature in society, that most people aren't ready to wrap their heads around the fact that A, time travel is possible, and B, other people have been working in the medium forever.
Yeah.
It would be like, here we are on Earth, right? And, X amount of decades ago, we learned that we could fly. It doesn't mean that flying was invented. We just gained access to something that could always be going on and would be going on other, like, it exists. Flying exists. We just became part of the activity. So now here we are. Time travel exists. We're just becoming part of the activity as a group. But has to be an understanding that through society, there's been an aspect of individuals that have been working in this medium.
Yeah. The problem is society is lied to about physics and everything.
Right. Yeah.
And,
physics is way off.
Yeah. Gravity is from electromagnetism from the sun. There's a billion types of gravity, not just one.
Mm-hmm.
It holds matter together, which is holographic in nature. And space travel is time travel. So out in space, not on the Earth in 3D or whatever, but out in space, time is just it's something you plug into the GPS computer and says, well, I need to go with Eric and have a hamburger in that neighboring galaxy. Oh, and I got to pick up an umbrella. And then we got to be back here right now, and we can do it.
Mhm.
And it's not a big deal because you don't, you can manipulate it. Well, I want to go to the past, or I want to do this, but you start causing ripples in times. The problem right now is the Earth. It's always been a timeline war, because wars are part and parcel of the physics of the universe, whether or not they tell us it is or not. Yeah, we're in third density, maybe in lower fourth right now, but by all accounts. And that's why people are waking up, because the Earth is rising. The Earth is ascending in the dimensional caste system. But all wars are temporal in nature, and there's a lot of movies and Star Trek where they, oh my gosh, we got to go back in time and fix this, which you can't really do. I mean, you got to be really careful about it, from everything I've read. Because when they first, the U.S. military started messing around with this after World War II, they were like, all right, you Marines, go back there and, make sure that this happens. And they went and did that. And they come back and they're like, why didn't you, complete your mission? And they said, we did. We captured Hitler. Here he is. And it's like, well, nothing happened. Nothing changed. And it's because they just created another timeline.
That's the way I was just thinking of it. Yeah.
And some clever person or ET was like, you idiots, you're messing around with time. You don't know how to do it. You got to go back, and you can't change too much. You can only do certain things that don't affect the overall timelines. Timelines are said to heal at some point in the future, but yeah, I hope
there's something.
I hope that timeline stays away from us. All of a sudden,
the more we learn, like it's funny, because I get what you're saying. Like, our brains think of these quagmires that would occur through moving through time.
Temporal anomalies.
But in reality, it actually just turns out that reality creation, whatever you want to call it, is just more complex than we can wrap our heads around yet again. And it turns out there's something that goes on that actually allows for us to move through time, pretty much do whatever we want, and nothing really changes.
Yeah.
That's what's really going on. So it's this whole idea, like when you're saying, like, well, because when you go back in time, you can't do this, you can't. And it's not because you can't. It's just when you say can't, it really just means it's going to have a negligible impact.
Right. So I read a book. I've read several books on temporal physics and things like this. Man, it's complicated. Mm-hmm. So the basics of it is time happens all at once: past, present, future, and they're all changing.
Yes.
Past, present, future are all constantly changing. It's like those swirling
in motion
7-Elevens, with the Slurpee.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It keeps revolving. And
yes.
So
I'm picturing a toroid, like a giant donut, and everything exists on that toroid. All possibility exists somewhere. Like, everything that could happen is at a place and a time. And it is all in motion as well. So even if you wanted to go back to the same place in time, it actually has reoriented. Like, that event has relocated still. It's in flux and in motion.
The weird thing about it was, in this book, is that when we do go back in the past and muck with stuff, we're changing our past for you and me, for everyone. And so it's like, well, I got this, Marshall Vauban's book on star forts, and it's like, well, wait a minute, this page just went blank. It's like things like that will start to occur, or the book will change, and I won't remember this page where,
right,
it won't be there.
Right.
And so that's the problem. If you talk, this guy was in communication with ETs, and they were, I don't know who it was, and they were saying, look, time is not that. You've been lied to by the regressives that it's linear time, so you're all fucked up in the head. But out in space, it's not that big a deal. It's like, all right, we need to go here and pick up some, fishing gear and go fish on this other planet. And they just plug all that in, or it's all mental, and everyone moves in a mothership, that's all, bio and constructed out of their own DNA, and everyone's one with the craft and everything like that, and they just move through time, and it's like, what's the big deal? It's only to us. It's like, oh my God, H.G. Wells, how did he know? And it's not really like what H.G. Wells was saying. That was his 19th century occult version of, Jules Verne. They were all kind of tapped into occult society. They kind of knew what was around and what had happened in the past, more so than the average person by 20,000 leagues. It's just this weird. Time is a weird component to deal with because we're so attached to our concept of linear time. Yesterday was yesterday, today was today. The calendars, watch, it's all like, we really don't need that.
Right.
But in our reality right now, we need those things. But the problem is digesting a lot of these concepts and everything. It is truly hard.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think 20 years ago is when I sort of started to understand time a little better. And I was like, holy shit.
It's just a tool that we use collectively. I look at time now like it's almost like a movie set, right? All the cameras, all the audio equipment, everything needs to be timed.
Yeah.
Just so that there's a reference point for the event.
Right.
It's not like the cameras care what time of day it is. It doesn't matter. They just need something. They need a reference of synchronicity, or something to sync to, I should say. And that's all we're doing too. Is time's just a tool for us to have a reference, just like those devices need to have a reference point to communicate.
Yeah.
But other than that, outside of it being a reference point, we can't allow it to be more. It's a tool for us to use. It's not anything other than that.
Yeah. And, you're starting to get into merging timelines, Mandela effect.
Mm-hmm.
I just read yesterday something of that, there was another timeline where Trump won the election.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. You've got to consider, well, I hope I'm on the more positive timeline. He didn't win. That's not a good sign to me, but, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's whatever we've chosen to experience. And it's a fascinating but mind-boggling subject.
Mm-hmm.
Just that. And when I mentioned to some friend who was like, tell me about UFOs, and I started mentioning time travel, they were just like, oh, whoa. You've been watching too many movies. And I said, well, yes, but, they have some interesting information in them. But you have to read books too.
For sure.
And so this is one of the big hurdles, I think, where, I'm full disagreement with people. Oh, we can red pill people. Well, you can only red pill those people that are beginning the awakening process. So in effect, yes, but no, because they're doing it anyway. You've just told a story to somebody who's already in the awakening process, and I've talked to people who are just sort of awakening to some of this, and they're like, well, I understand UFOs and ET and other worlds, but this time travel and military stuff, I just don't buy that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like a staircase. I mean, they're at one step and they're comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
This happens in the disclosure movement as well. I'm not knocking people at all, but they've reached a certain step and they're like, you know what, I'm good here.
Yep.
I like the view, the information I've gotten from the other steps. It's great, but I'm going to stay here.
Absolutely. Hit their comfort zone.
Yeah, this whole thing about regressive ETs and all that stuff, that scares me. No. And that's their choice and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of us that are like, pardon me as I move up, because I want to consider
the hard truth.
Everything.
Yep.
And and to some people, I don't blame them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't blame them at all, because the stuff we're talking about today is horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh shit, I don't know, and I've been through that. 30 years ago, my mind was blown. 20 years ago, my mind was blown. Right around 8-9 years ago, it stopped being blown.
Mm-hmm.
And things hurt me, and realizations, oh, this makes sense. I don't want it to. I don't want to connect those dots, but they're going to do it anyway. Your higher self is like, don't be a sissy.
Mm-hmm.
Come on now, you can take it. And you're like, I can't. I mean, I don't know about you, but there are days when I'm just like, hey man, I want to leave all this shit behind.
Oh, I get it.
Work in my garage and write a book on the Civil War or something.
Yeah.
But even if I write a Civil War book, the information is always there. Death ritual, who's behind the scenes. Albert Pike and the Freemasons. He was a bad dude. Talk about the Aleister Crowley. Before there was Crowley, there was Albert Pike. He's the grand poobah Freemason in the South.
Mm-hmm.
He was a bad dude. I'm sure he sacrificed many a person in a basement of a mansion somewhere. Probably a lot of slaves, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a story, and I don't know if it's true, but that George Washington, since he was a Freemason, he was sacrificing some of his slaves in rituals.
I'd never heard that either.
No, and I was, George Washington is the man. He owned slaves. I don't like that, but he wanted to free. Just after he died, I want to live in luxury until I die. But he's mostly on the side of the positive. I think won the war, sort of. The British East India Company made out on both sides. That was the real deep state of the English.
That was a lot of people aren't familiar with the Dutch East India Company, and them
too. But really, the British East India Company, when it was chartered, they had their own army, their own navy,
the British,
their own leaders, their own uniforms, their own security guards, their own ships.
But that's correct. But correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't the Dutch East India Company actually exceed them in volumes of these things? Weren't they like the largest army and navy at one point?
Yeah, early on, and then the British, I think, around the mid-19th century, surpassed them.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, what does that sound like today? Sounds like the CIA, the DIA, black program.
People have no idea. They have no idea. Yep, they have no idea that we have an entire other massive Air Force and Navy for the CIA.
And the space, parts of the Space Force.
Yeah, people have no idea. Like there's carriers out there for the CIA. There's bombers for the CIA. I mean, come on, submarines for the CIA.
I think it was Joseph Farrell who said that Deutsche Bank has its own black ops, battalion.
Oh, I believe it.
I know. We send the battalion out to, it's just a bank.
I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember which store. I've worked in a lot of corporations. I can't remember which one it was exactly. I'm going to guess that it was something like a Walmart corporation that I was communicating with someone with. And they were stating that they have a crew at the ready. If there's mutterings in a store about unionizing, they will fire everyone in that damn store and they will fly in that crew to staff that place until they can hire more locals again. They have that at the ready.
Right. Look how easy it is to get a job at Walmart, and the job is dumbed down to that of a slave, debt slave. Mm-hmm. It's easy to replace debt slaves because there's not a lot of training involved. It's not like an aerospace company who has somebody with 40 years experience and they're just going to say, "Oh, we're going to get rid of them."
Yep.
No.
Yep.
That's the dichotomy we have. And Amazon, I mean, I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon. I'm as guilty as anyone, but it's just like, I can't even imagine what it's like to work for Google or Amazon. And these stupid, I'm sorry, these stupid kids out in Silicon Valley going, I want to make a new app. I want to be the next hedge fund, electronic guru. I want, and, riding around on their scooters with their laptops, in bathing suits and t-shirts. And it's like, you don't realize who you're working for and what you're doing. Mm-hmm. There was a show, it was really funny. It was on HBO, I think. It was called Silicon Valley. And it was how these kids were trying to, these brilliant kids were trying to come up with the new best thing, another Google or something, a new internet. And, we're going to do the new thing, man. And all the crap and weird people they had to deal with, it was a funny show. But it also showed you, they're just part of the problem. Mm-hmm. What do they want to do? They want to be internet millionaires. They want to be billionaires and create a new internet that can also do a better job than the old internet or something like that. And it's like, you're not doing anything for humanity. They did an interview, I think, and all these kids out there were like, I want to create the next big app. And it's like,
We're in a very weird spot because nobody wants to work anymore. And they
want to do the wrong. They're just lost in this matrix.
Yes, everything's twisted around because I don't know how to put it. It's people are in the wrong positions in life. I'm sorry, but I don't understand why does it take a whole bunch of adults to run a McDonald's? Because when I was a kid, kids did it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's the way it worked. The manager was 18 years old, and everybody else had working papers from their parents so that they could run a McDonald's. And that was pretty much how almost every community was across the country. Was kids did kid jobs. Part-time jobs were staffed by children. And kids ran registers. And that's how life functioned. And they were integrated. And I would suggest that as a society, our children learn to grow and fit in better by having these jobs than most of the curriculum of their classes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother topic, is the kids and education and the job market and debt slavery. And
Yep.
it's really sad when I see young people and they're so excited about what they're doing. And then you realize what they're doing is like, well, I want to move to New York and create a new financial app to fuck over people and make money. And I'm like, don't you want to be part of the solution? You know, I told my nephews, you know, they're not in that world. They're sort of, one's a photographer, one's growing organic vegetables. And I said, you guys are, you know, you're not part of the problem. I said, just don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. You know, my one nephew is doing organic farming basically in Hawaii, and he's working with locals, you know, and it's like, he doesn't care about living in a big house. Or he built one of those micro houses with his girlfriend. They actually built it themselves.
I was just looking at the idea of foraging through the woods here in Alaska, because apparently there's stuff in the woods here that is marketable that other people want. Chaga. Chaga is some sort of thing that grows on trees that people want, that's apparently all over the place in Alaska and highly valued. So I might become a chaga forager.
Well, be careful. Because when people take things from the environment, tends to affect the whole ecosystem.
Oh, understood. I mean, there's always got to be a right way and a wrong way.
Yeah. So my wife and I just watched a documentary last night on Netflix, and I forget the name, but it's about the oceans. And it's by a young guy in his 20s. And my gosh, I give him all the credit in the world. And what he did was this whole documentary was how fishing is not what they tell us it is. Okay. How there's slavery aboard ships in the Pacific, you know, with the Asian fishing companies, and how the giant nets is like the size of half of Washington, D.C., just destroying the bottom of the ocean. They just rake in everything. And they're killing, you know, the sharks, and they're killing the apex predators and everything that's screwing up the coral reefs. And my God, it's affecting everything. And how in Scotland, the salmon's not really pink, it's gray. They color it. And it's full of, you know, the fish are sick. The farm-raised fish are all full of lice, sea lice, and all these things. And I couldn't believe it. It just blew us away. And it's very sad.
This is why you only eat Alaskan salmon, folks.
Right. Just one level of fishing is screwing up the oceans are the lungs of the world. People think it's the Amazon. No, that's part of it. But the oceans and the plankton and the little creatures, those are the lungs of the world producing oxygen.
The oceans are the biggest mass on the surface.
Yeah, quicker by doing all this fishing and all the other, you know, ocean-born skullduggery that we're doing. You know,
I think that's an angle that people don't realize, the secrecy over eons either. What's going on at sea? That's I mean, that's forever been the mystery of the lands. Is everybody's always looked to the sailors as like, hey, what are those guys doing out there? And the reality is, whatever they want. That's always been the case.
Yeah, and so when you're getting into national security and secrecy of you know, military-industrial complex, the deep state, and everything like that, you've got to factor in some of these big corporations and what they're doing. And big fish is destroying the oceans of the world, and you know, not just the United States, but everyone. And they showed this little tiny village in the Hebrides or whatever islands, and they just corralled these whales with power boats and slaughtered them, so that the waters just ran red everywhere, bright red. And they're like, you know, the fisherman had a really good point. He's like, you're pointing fingers at us. Everyone's like, don't kill the whales. And it's like, when you eat a fish stick or your sushi, you're doing the same thing.
Oh, for sure. Oh, absolutely. Yes. If you're eating fish, then you can't point your fingers at the fisherman, for sure. I mean, that's ridiculous.
And of course, what did my wife and I have last night? Sushi.
There you go.
And we're like, I think I've had enough, and put it aside. And I just felt terrible. I mean, I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was that bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I give this, say what you want about Netflix. Maybe it's, I know that Stephen Greer's documentaries are on Netflix. That's a good sign. And so is this kid's documentary about fishing, because man, he did a lot of secret camera work, and he exposed the entire worldwide industry. I'm sure there's some people who really want to erase this kid from the timeline. But I couldn't.
He'll pop up somewhere else on the toroid.
Exactly. That's another issue is, when you whack somebody, okay, you eliminated that person or persons from the immediate thing, but they're not going anywhere. Their souls
There's a karma thing that goes on with that too,
and they're going to hold your feet to the fire.
I feel that actually goes in many levels too, because I also feel that in this big scheme of whatever this game is that we're all playing, I also feel that offing yourself is a penalty in the big game. That, some people, when they decide, oh, I can't take this anymore, I'm going to quit. You don't get a free pass. You're not out of the game. Like, you're actually going to show up somewhere else with a massive penalty, is my belief.
Well, I think it's not a penalty. What I've read in metaphysics is that people who commit suicide, they've done their best. Committing suicide takes actually a lot of courage. It's not a coward's way out.
I don't know that I like the term coward's way either, but I don't know that if I like the word courage either, because it depends on where you're focusing. Because in one direction, you could say that they're not focusing in one way, so they're cowardly for facing away from one thing. So you're walking a thin line, Warner.
Yeah. Well, how can you blame? I mean, just someone coming to light with the knowledge that we're talking about. There's a lot of people who can't mentally handle that. I don't blame people for committing suicide. I don't think there's a penalty for it, but I think they have to maybe come back and learn. They didn't learn the full lesson, the full curriculum in this.
Oh, I exactly. I'm totally following you, but therein lies the penalty. Now you get to come back to the same damn spot because you're not going to advance because you took yourself out of the game too soon. So you didn't learn, you didn't advance. The penalty is you're going back to start. That's what I mean by penalty. You're selling yourself short by doing that because you're not gaining anything.
Yeah. I mean, I have chronic back pain and I have depression.
Right.
Unless you have those kinds of things going on, you really, like, all my friends are like, oh, I feel sorry, it must be horrible. You have no idea what it's like. And so I don't blame people in that arena with some of these issues compounded. Stomach issues.
But now, if it turned out that because of your back pain and depression if because of that you then said, because of that I'm going to kill myself. What I'm getting at is that I don't believe reality will allow you to separate yourself from that with that tool. And I think maybe a penalty would be that now you're going to come back to another life where you're going to get that twice as much, and now you're going to have to learn to deal with it again.
Well, I don't know how the system works, and I don't think it's run by God or whatever the hell you want to call source or anything.
Understood.
Like that.
But there's some sort of karma and some sort of a balance. And you said, if you have a problem, the way I look at it is that if you have this problem, and if that problem causes you to want to remove yourself from the equation, you are doing yourself some disservice in a bigger picture.
No, I agree. It's for myself, it's kind of like, I came, like everyone else, I came here to do a job. And it's not fun. It's not tiddlywinks. It's not that. It's to, help the planet awaken, and everyone's doing their job, no matter what they're doing. But they're doing their job, and it's like, it's probably not in my contract to off myself. It's, you got to tough it out and do your best. If someone whacks you, that's not your issue. But if someone likened the universe to being all these tiny gears, and when one gear turns, just like a wristwatch, all the rest turn. So these people, these deep state black hats who go around and say, oh, I'm going to whack these people. Warner and Heck are a pain in the ass. They probably wouldn't even bother wasting a bullet on us. But others, they're only, they're turning a gear that may not be, the best thing to do for, once you do something, you're affecting all the other, gears in the universe. And so, be careful what you do,
And wouldn't it also be a consideration when you have folks that have looking glass technologies available to them? Many factions do now. That as much as they might be like, that Warner guy's pissing us off this month, we need to do something about it. But then somebody comes running in, but remember in 2030, the looking glass says that we need him to do such and such. So be quiet and take what Warner's saying. That could be going on too.
I don't know. You and I don't know what we're doing, but probably not much. We're not probably on anyone's radars. But the thing is, everyone's here to do a job. Everyone's part of everyone else's life in a sense. We're all one, law of one. It's like, just do your job. It's meant to be painful. It's meant to be horrific. It's meant to be a pain in the ass. I'm really trying to just forget that the most of the world is not going to wake up to this. Especially, if I'd say that the part of the disclosure arena, which is probably, 10 million people worldwide, I have no idea. Let's just use 10 million as a right now, because there's only the bottom 10% of us that are willing to go the whole full Monty on it. And it's like, well, wait a minute, and most people just want to do, crystals, and I want to contact the Pleiadians, and it's not that simple. And we need everybody to do their thing, and that's fine. But I
think a lot of people have their brains,
blowing my mind for 30 years, and I'm still, every day I'm like, oh God, more.
I think it's weird because a lot of people will resist the idea of there being something going on off of this planet. But then I think the program works well enough that those folks, that when you can even get them to think of the possibility, unfortunately go in the direction of folks like Greer, where they then think, well, they're benevolent and they're going to help us then, right? Because they can't think of the other way, that they're actually been eating us forever.
Yeah, I think, I don't blame people for thinking that way in a positive way, because we do need to think positively. So I don't actually blame anyone for, a viewpoint like that. I think the universe is mostly benevolent. So they're fairly correct. There's some indifferent people that are like, but the 3 to 5%, are really nasty Nazi scumbags.
Yeah. More often than not, when you go for a walk in the woods, the squirrels, the birds, the rabbits, most things will leave you alone. So I think of it like going into the woods, though. But if you're going to go into space, not everything's bunnies and daisies. You need to also be educated that there are bears and there are other things out there.
It's like Africa. I mean, if you go messing around with the Cape buffalo, you're not going to live long.
Yeah.
But it's that. But also, a lot of those lions, tigers, and bears, polar bears, so to speak, they're down here in their mindset going, well, you guys are idiots, and the planetary vibration was low, so we were just doing our thing. Penny always says it's no big deal out there. Everyone's an asshole. And it's probably true. It's just business. It's like, what? Who's evil? Why are you calling us evil? So what? You guys eat cows. We're just eating you, and you ate the cow.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's not good and evil kind of a thing. But it is hard, I think, for us to understand anyone, whether out there or down here, or anyone who's messing around with children.
Correct.
I draw the frickin' line.
On the same way as it's like, and Tony Rodriguez says this too. He's like, there's plenty of adults that we can screw with on this planet. I mean, if we're going to do these things, right? If we're really going to be that sinister and hide behind closed doors and in the darkness, we can do it to adults exclusively. We don't have to screw with kids. It's like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah. Well, why do we eat lamb and veal? Sorry. I mean, we're not much better if human race. I mean, we're pretty bloodthirsty. We've learned and been taught, and yeah, we've been mucked with and coerced and things like that. Absolutely, but we have a lot of responsibility in the game. There's no doubt. I mean, I'll put myself up there. I've hunted deer and elk. You know, I've killed birds. You know, to eat, but still. You know,
I always try to impress that upon people too, is to not forget that we are still animals. We're in this same circle of life, you know.
Yes, but
right. We have a higher level of understanding and responsibility, but we are still inherently, we are animals. Straight up, we're animals.
Mother Earth, yeah, we're all connected. But I've also, I don't know who it was, Lloyd Pine. It's like he said before he died. He said, "We're not animals, and we are certainly not proto-humans or apes or Neanderthals. We're a different species."
Okay.
Now, this is maybe just semantics, but you know,
it is. But I'm curious to what his angle is.
Well, higher consciousness and speech.
Okay.
And the capacity to learn fast and invent and be creative. You know, by all accounts, we're human race on Earth is very creative with our 12 strands of DNA. And so the regressives look at us just like a cow. These guys are just cows. We don't care. But there are a lot of other people who think, well, wait a minute, you guys are a big experiment. You know, there's been a lot invested in you. You know, your destiny is to evolve into higher realms with that 12 strands of DNA and do some benevolent, kick-ass things. That the rest of us, you know, we can do some of that, but theoretically, because you guys are an experiment, no one else has 12 strands of DNA. You know, as Alex Collier once said, you know, we're going to be a handful. I think we're going to be a positive handful, but there's, you know, going to be a portion of us out there that are going to be a negative handful. And so it's like, oh, shit. You know, I want to go out there and help people and, you know, bring balance back into the universe. Apparently it's on the negative side. Certainly is here on Earth. And Alex Collier says Earth is the darkest place in the universe.
Yep, I've heard a lot of
our universe. The ground zero. That's why I call it Guadalcanal. You know, it's just a bloody slog, and there's so much horror going on here. But to ignore it is like, well, I know the Holocaust existed, but I don't want to think about it. It's like you cannot have that attitude forever. But I think we're only going to get the 5% maybe in your lifetime. If we're lucky, the 5%. The rest of the world, forget it. They're asleep, you know, they're doing their job. Maybe that's their contracts I just want to sell soda at the 7-Eleven. Okay. That's your job. That's okay. You know, it's not, you know, I get angry too and frustrated at people, but it's like, you can't force a square peg in a round hole.
Right.
Unless you have a really big sledgehammer, you know, but that peg is going to split apart. And that's what people's heads are going to do. They're going to split apart if you try to hammer this stuff that you and I are talking about.
And it's not going to work in reality, because I've been following James Giordano. He does a wonderful talk on neuroweapons in the battlefield of the mind, and that's where we're at today, like you were saying with the red pill. Like, you can't force a red pill on someone, especially in the environment that we're in, because blue pills are being handed out not only for free, but with all kinds of incentives that go with them. Sure. So you're very challenged to get somebody to see things from a red pill perspective today, when the blue pill is just being like mass marketed and everybody's asking for it. Like they just keep, oh yeah, tell me the bullshit.
Yeah. You know, when I first I don't remember when the first Matrix movie came out. But I watched it with a friend, and boy, that, you know, this is 20 something years ago. What was it, late 90s or something?
Scary how old that movie is now.
Yeah, and it jived with some of the things I had been reading in books at that time. And it just, but the movie is super duper creepy. And I thought, oh no, could this be some sort of allegory or parable? And of course, today we know that it is, in a way. It's more abstract, but it's yeah.
Absolutely.
But it, you know, yes, artificial intelligence is probably the main enemy that many people in the universe fight, whatever the black goo kind of concept is. It's some sort of, sentient, artificial sentient intelligence that's extremely powerful. Obviously, it's taken over entire star systems and other things like that. And that makes sense. That's a difficult one, how we're ever going to defeat that. And when I say we, I mean in the whole freaking galaxy or universe. Sorry to speak for everyone, but
Yeah, what do people do if they actually sit down and have to consider in some capacity, like to do this like a thought experiment? Imagine we're already there. Now, what do we do?
Yeah,
just that simple.
I'd like to know why Earth is ground zero for this battle. Why we're the darkest place in the universe. Sure, garden planet, 12 strands of DNA, crazy humans. Okay, maybe. I just don't get it. And no one has given a very good answer to that. It's got, well, you're the last star system to be freed, says some of these ET groups. And I'm like, okay, thanks a lot. I'm not ungrateful if that's the truth. And he has a darker view of this, and I think it's very practical. That not everyone out there has an agenda. I understand that. There is no free lunch.
Right.
But I'd like to know why this planet, apparently is this special planet. Well, they terraformed it, 12 billion years ago, I guess, says Alex Collier, at least, to be this special garden planet. And I'm like, you picked a bad neighborhood. Why? If we're in the middle of the Draconian Empire, if that's true, why did they pick that? Now, the only thing I can logically answer is that, well, we need a base of positive operations or something. And it's like, well, shit. I'd like to ask the people in charge of that program. Was that the smartest thing to do? I'm not sure. What about on the fringe edge or something? But we're smack dab in the middle of the bad neighborhood. No one can give me a precise answer as to why. I'm sure there's a multitude of reasons. I'm sure everyone has, their own DNA experiments, whether it be plant, animal, fish, or human, or whatever it is. Everyone's got skin in the game and stuff like that. But it's like, what is the answer? Why create this special garden planet that's amazing in the middle of the worst neighborhood of the galaxy, and by all accounts, probably the worst neighborhood in the whole universe? I think, from what it sounds like, it's like, okay, I see some of the logic of that. Why not create it? Maybe our whole star system was created that way, but there seems to be bad guys everywhere. We're surrounded. We're Custer's last stand.
I'm almost thinking of it right now.
Well, I would root for the Sioux Indians myself.
There was I forget which one of the Star Wars movies ones. Not one of the originals. It was one of the after ones. But there was a cloner planet, a planet where they were manufacturing clones. And if I remember correctly, it was occulted, hidden in the middle of nowhere, so that no one knew that was going on. What if we're something like that? Like we're being farmed. We are stuffed away in the middle of nowhere. Similarly, because we're a product, it would stand to reason.
Yes,
we're a black market product. We're in a black market zone.
Yeah, it could be that.
It could be that simple.
The human race was an illegal race to manufacture, but 22 guys got together and they were like, they'll never notice over here.
Oh my God, this is so funny. We're like a second run of Nike sneakers that's not supposed to be happening.
These are bootlegs. And by the way,
dude, we got genuine human beings for sale, dude. Like these are quality. This isn't low grade stuff. This is from Earth.
Did you see the Nike brand that rapper did, and they contain human blood?
That actually is real. It wasn't just a headline. That's real.
That's real. He was doing that as a private. Nike was freaking out. I don't know. That just shows you the kind of crazy shit that's going on in Hollywood and everywhere. These sports rapper stars. But anyway, I think you're
people will sell their souls to the devil for $1 million nowadays. Absolutely.
With these. Absolutely. I think there's definitely something to that. Earth is this Wild West. I've also heard that, it's the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, hey, do whatever you want there because it's out of the legal zone. It's in the, the Romulan neutral zone. Do anything you want. And I think it got out of hand. I think the dinosaur experiment definitely got out of hand. Someone lobbed a bunch of comets on that one. I think you and I can guess who were doing those experiments, and they got out of hand. And then the mammals arose and whatever. I'm not a big fan of evolution. I think it's full of holes.
Big holes because they're lying about the timetables.
Yeah, that's why everyone, I agree with Alex Collier. 12 billion years sounds a little more plausible because you can do more over a longer period of time.
For sure.
Why someone said 4 billion, I don't know. It could have been an idiot geologist going, the layer says 4 billion. And
what we'll learn in a billion years from now is how a billion years ago they didn't know anything about math and calculating stuff. So just like now we look back at science from 400 years ago and we laugh at them and what they surmised because of the context they were working in. How were they supposed to know otherwise? But regardless, their science is now knuckleheadedness. And in 100 years from now, our science today will be knuckleheadedness.
Right.
Do not need to be so endearing to the science of today, folks, especially with all the shenanigans going on in the world and people screaming from the mountaintops that you can't argue with science. Sit any scientist next to me. I will destroy him on almost anything he considers himself an expert in because there's cracks in any dam and it takes very few questions to take any expert and have them simply say, I don't know. That's a good question.
Oh, don't get me started. I mean,
right?
My studies in histories, the historians I've contacted,
supposed experts.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, what about this? And they're like, we may never know how they did that. And they always say that about the pyramids when you did get too close to the truth. A mainstream academia person will say, well, we may never know. And it's a conversation ender.
Right, because at that point you get to challenge them for speculating everything else they set up until that point.
Or they say, well, you're into the woo-woo science. And somebody came up with that clever term.
Yeah.
CIA. As they came up with the terms conspiracy theorists too.
Yeah.
They even have a document that's public. Yeah, we did it. Mm-hmm. We want credit, and you can see the CIA did it. So, I mean, academia is ridiculous. And I think one of the horrible things for me as a historian is, I'm doing this report on star forts. Mm-hmm. Every one of these books, they don't tell you why they chose such a design.
Yes.
There's no architectural elevations with measurements, none in any archives, whether they be Dutch, French.
I'm Russian. So intrigued by those structures because to me they are so anomalous.
Right.
Because
they do make some military sense here and there. They do.
Some, but when you're looking at the labor and the effort, the massive engineering and effort that has to go into that structure, I don't think people can really wrap their heads around. I want to see the labor tallies. Like, I want to know exactly how many people they say were involved in the task. I want to know how many were bricklayers. I want to know how many were dirt movers, because that's when you start getting into the real conversation of those types of structures. You can't just simply say like, oh, they built them to defend the city. Who? When? What? Yeah. How many hands did that take? How many people were involved in the task for how many years? And when you look at those structures across the globe, how many people were involved in, like, was everybody on the planet a stonemason?
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. And the size, you can't see by this photo very well.
Right.
But that's a tiny little building on this giant star fort.
Yes.
In, I think, France or Holland.
Yeah, I can't even see all the different layers of the structures on the interior and stuff like that. These are massive scale items.
Right, they had this giant thing out front. It's called a hornwork. Mm-hmm. I'll be damned if I found in any of these. I think I've read 30 books in English and French. So
did they state?
No one explains why they needed hornworks, or they put one here and not over here. Same thing with the pointed things. That's a bastion, but if it's isolated, it's called a ravelin. Mm-hmm. And so they put a ravelin at. Here's Fort McHenry. Mm-hmm. That's Fort McHenry in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. Now, they built a ravelin, which is just a giant triangle that's detached here. Well, there's tons of real estate around. This is seaside, so they built up some of the defenses. Why didn't they put ravelins on around the edges if it's such a great design feature for defense?
Mm-hmm.
No explanations, no
Yeah.
elevations. They just said, we built it.
And when you
And
look
here's
at
the military history to go around it.
Yep.
The British lay siege, blah, blah, blah. No, why did they choose that design? Because a lot of star forts are not stars. Why did you do this weird Well, it was the shape of this island. Then you get into the concept of who built these artificial islands.
Mm-hmm.
Were they there originally with some sort of foundation? They thought, this would be a great fort. And a lot of forts never saw action because they're in places that are not strategic.
Right.
A lot of them are, but it's baffling. And as
another simple engineering feat that people don't discuss with those forts is when you just simply look at the amount of earth that has to be moved. So even before you get into structure, when you look at the waterways and the dirt moving, it's like, are you kidding me? What like, show me the fleet of Caterpillar D8s that they had back then, because I can go to a job site over here in Anchorage, Alaska, that the lot that they've been moving dirt on, the lot is smaller than a quarter acre. And they've been moving dirt there for a foundation for damn near a year now. And that's with heavy equipment. So when you look at a Starfort location, I mean, it's obviously bigger than a quarter of an acre. And the elevations and masses of dirt that are getting moved at the time periods that those were being built, I mean, seriously, what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
How do you move that much earth?
And so, it's not that they didn't have hundreds of years to build and add on, or they didn't have the skilled people or the labor. But the problem is, none of these books explain why Vauban or Menno van Coehoorn or any of these designers chose this design over that, or why they placed this inexplicable series of complex polygonal ditches in this fashion, other than fields of fire and, killing zones, cross angle of fire, which makes sense. But it's like it's on a scale that's just biblical.
Yes, the scale almost seems to me to exceed the capabilities of the weapons that we're discussing to begin with. So yes, when you're talking like lines of fire, it makes sense. But it seems like for the size of these facilities, like the armaments and things seem to be misproportioned in scale.
Well, yes and no.
Because if you're using like a musket and you're up on a wall that high,
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like in reality, you're just firing stuff into like there's no precision at that point.
Not well. Some they had artillery engineers that were using trigonometry.
Okay.
And so they had mortars of varying sizes, and so this infrastructure, this is in a Starfort in France.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of barracks and stables and powder magazines and everything, but they could just sit here 500, 800 yards away, and you saw it in the movie The Last of the Mohicans. The French dug zigzag siege trenches, and they used 12-inch mortars. Well, you can do that over as long as you want, and you set a fire and demolish everything inside the Starfort. You still don't be able to take it from the defenders. But I'm like, it's just, there's a lot of things that just don't make sense. Why build a ravelin right here? See that?
Yep.
What is the point of that? You're cut off, even if you build a wood bridge, you're cut off. The enemy is right close to the enemy lines and you get slaughtered. There's no book that has told me why that is an advantage.
Is it possible there's a tunnel underneath since you have a man-made moat? Is it possible they could have a tunnel under there, or there's not?
I think it's possible.
Because that would make sense to me. If they could retreat under there through a tunnel, it would make sense.
But
and for all the other work that's going on in that area, I would not doubt that a tunnel could be there.
Yeah, and then the enemy takes it, and it's a stronghold for the enemy.
You could collapse that tunnel with water too. Yeah, but no, I see what you're saying. It's that there's questionable logic to these star forts, and I don't like the presentation on them either. This might be a great topic for the.
I'm the only military historian who's taken a crack at this. I've communicated with other military historians, and they're like, I don't have no idea what you're talking about, because they don't understand telluric energy, earth energy, ley lines, water, electromagnetic running water. They don't understand, I mean, all these polygonal things are just whacked out. They're so complex.
I actually do think there's something that's one of the things that I want to look into myself with the Star Forts, being a plumber and understanding hydraulics and materials and things. I do believe that there is a potential that something was going on in those cities in that capacity, that they did know something about flowing water and gaining advantage from it.
Right. And that telluric energy, I'm not saying they didn't, the engineers, who did build these, they were Freemasons. So they must have understood that aspect and used it to their advantage for defense. However they did it, I don't know how you do that. But of course, we're working in fields of the occult and subtle energies of the earth and other things that are not well understood today because they are, hugely covered up. And
yep, I believe there's a lot more that can be done with water as far as reaping phenomena from it. I believe folks like Victor Schauerberger gave us some insight to that water is a valuable medium of study. And it makes me wonder when I see these star forts and the amount of engineering that's gone into them and the amount of water engineering that has some motive there that I don't understand. It intrigues me. But maybe we should have a whole other episode on star forts next time.
Yeah.
That would be a good one.
It's obviously a defensive moat.
Oh, for sure. It has that capacity as well.
But it doesn't, a lot of forts don't have, they have dry moats. Mm-hmm. And some of them are on top of mountains. There's one that's a beautiful one in Portugal. And you look around, even today, and it's like, what the hell is it defending?
Right.
There's like a tiny little town over here. There's another tiny little town way over there. And in the 18th century, they must have been even smaller. Mm-hmm. So it gets, these Italian villages that are surrounded by these giant fortifications and bastions that are 50 feet high. It's like, why?
Yeah, were there really roaming bands of savages at the time, tearing down villages and stuff?
There were armies, but it's like, it's overkill on a scale that I can't grasp because modern tanks and armored vehicles could not scale those fortifications today.
Right. So like that, the book that you just held up,
17th century cavalry and troops, and I'm like,
the star fort on the cover of the book that you held up. Do you have any inkling so far on what they say the timetable was that it took to build that from start to finish? Have you heard anybody make any statement to that?
They do mention time periods of they added on to things over time. So they built a star fort. They add on Vauban went around, adding on to existing forts and adding parapets and curtain walls and bastions and ravelins and doing all this other complex stuff because it's all about in-depth defenses. And that does make some sense. But man, if you look on old maps, every city and little town was fortified. Mm-hmm. They actually drew the zigzag fortifications. Vienna alone had these massive bastions, which I think most of them are gone today. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, that's Vienna. You want to protect that against the Turks, I guess, But a lot of this stuff seems strangely complex. Here's a design. You tell me what the military engineer was trying to do with that.
That is extremely purposeful. Boy, oh boy.
What is going on with the hydraulic engineering, with all these canals and everything? It's so complex. And I'm thinking, what is the reason? Militaries that they like to build fortifications quick and easy. Now you're getting into kings and egos and field marshals and
have you ever seen?
But it's very strange that they would build something so utterly stunning and complex and harmonious and something an artist would design.
That made me think of Tesla's
in the wilderness.
The plumbing on that made me think of Tesla's check valve. Have you ever seen his no parts?
Yes.
That's what it makes me think of. Like when I see that, like that there's such intentions to some flows there for some reason, but I can't wrap my head on it.
And there's no, I don't want to harp on this, but we'll do another one. Here's an illustration of construction. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, in all my research on archives and everything, as well as everyone else, there are only, let's just say 17th and 18th century, there are only sketches like this. These are period correct sketches.
Okay.
no measurements, no elevations, nothing. It's drawings of existing constructions. All we get are artists' conceptions of what they think was going on.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they were using, anti-gravity or something, but the Freemasons may have been using some basic types of anti-gravity to get the job done. But why are we have all these sketches? I mean, thousands of completed constructions and not one sketch showing them how they built them. Only modern ones.
Are there similarities from one star fort to another in the block structure?
There are some similarities, but there's not one goddamn fort that's the same as the next.
Okay, 10 fort. Now, the block sizes, correct me if I'm wrong, they're relatively small. There's just like trillions of them, right?
Yeah, there's no megalithic conspiracy there.
Right. They're not big blocks, but even following what I know of standard labor practices, when you just start looking at these star cities and star forts and stuff like that, and just go on a brick count, how many bricks are there?
You got me, pal.
You know what I'm saying? Like that's because I'm looking at labor, and I'm just thinking like, who do you order the bricks from?
Well, you need surveyors.
That's like
geomancers. You need hydraulic engineers. You need stonemasons by the score, by the billions.
Yep.
And yes, they had a good deal of that, but
not if you're building one here and someone's building one there and someone's like how there's not. What time period on our planet were all the star forts built?
Well, they said 1350 to 1850.
Okay, how many are there?
Fort Jefferson in the Florida Keys, which makes no sense. It's out in the Florida Keys on a partially sunken island. There's a great place to build a fort. Where do you get your fresh water?
Where do you bring all your labor in from? Who's paying for all? Like it's really absurd.
It's weird. And the other thing is, to your point, there's no illustrations of any stonemasons building star forts.
It would be like let's pick a place in remote Alaska.
Illustrations that are 300-400 years old.
Let's pick a remote place in Alaska and imagine that we're going to construct a star city there right now, and think of everything that we would have to accomplish to make that happen.
Trillions of dollars. I mean, they're so huge. You can't get an idea. The only time people started looking at this was from satellite imagery. Half of them are buried in trees and and you can't appreciate it from ground level. It's impossible. I've overlooked, Fort McHenry, and I've been to a dozen star forts. You can appreciate details here and there. Fort McHenry is tiny, but you go to these places in Europe. I've been to one in France a long time ago, and I didn't know anything. But you have to walk around it, and you just don't get an appreciation. But the minute you go up and look at it from a huge scale, your jaw just hits the floor. I know they wanted to put entire garrisons and huge amounts of battalions and armies inside star forts. I get that. But there's just so many odd anomalies going on. And these books don't tell you jack shit. They just say, they built the star fort in 1750 and this army occupied it and this general did this and the King Louis the 16th. Well, and nothing. Why did they choose this shape? Why did they choose that location? Very little to no answer.
They make it out like as if they just happened to be there, and they were obviously getting attacked all the time. So then they had to build a fort. Like they just leave it at that.
I think this is my personal theory, and I could be wrong about all this, but and I always say that. I think they built a lot of these for sure. There's history forums that argue about, whether these things are a lot older than they may be. Maybe. They may have, some of them in Russia are just made of earth and they're all over the place and you can't see them without radar, laser radar. You can't see them. And all of a sudden people started doing that and all this stuff started to appear. And I'm thinking they're in the middle of nowhere. And they were in the middle of nowhere 200-300 years ago. So they say that 1350 to 1850. Well, I found a reference to a star fort in Turkey that was from 1150. So you tell me who built the first one. It certainly seems, who knows what our historical record really is, our timeline. Could be all fucked up. Anthony Fomenko says they added 500 years, 100 years there just for the sake of the Jesuits writing the history, which I think did happen probably for political reasons and others. I think some of these were earthen forts that had foundations. How old they were, I don't know. And somebody found some of these and said, shit, like little boys. You remember, let's go up to the top of the hill. In DC, we have the remnants of all the star forts and earthen forts from the Civil War. And I used to play in them when I was a boy. Mm-hmm. And it's like, what an amazing fort this would make. And all of a sudden, some of this weird geometry works well with angles of fire and dead zones and trenches and things like that. But a lot of it just plain doesn't. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's another town in Italy besides Palma Nova. There's another one, or it's in Portugal, which is amazing. And it's a decent sized town from the 1700s, the 18th century. And it has these huge bastions and curtain walls and things. And like I said in our first interview, it's like parking a multi-billion-dollar aircraft off of some small Maine harbor town to protect the fishing guys. Mm-hmm. Thank you, that's wonderful, but it doesn't make any sense. And they're like, oh, it's, Vauban's pré carré system of, and it's like, I've looked at all the maps and it's like some of these forts are in the middle of nowhere protecting what?
Right. And then how would you get, like, in that time period, how would you get justification to fund that? You'd be like, dude, you're crazy. I'm not building that there.
Yeah, I think kings had a hand in this. A lot of kings and dukes and things like that with egos and things. But
I get that. But at some point, yes, you're gonna run the tank dry if you keep doing things like that. And when
well, they say how broke, King Louis the 14th or 13th, 15th, 16th went broke building these things.
Okay, there you go.
And I'm like, static fortifications are useful sometimes. Mm-hmm. But as history points out, they're always vulnerable. And then all of a sudden your enemy has all your gunpowder, shot cannon, hot shot and everything. And very few of these things, according to the history books, were ever taken. Mm-hmm. Most never saw combat at all. The enemy were like, fuck it. We'll just go around it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way I looked at it. Yep.
They went around it. Now you built this $1 billion fort, and the enemy has to go another route. Okay, that was a huge expense just to get your enemy troops to go in a different direction.
Expensive detour. Yep.
I've asked military historians and like, oh, well, that's just the way they did it back then. That's another conversation.
How well did the Maginot Line work out for France?
Yeah, fantastic.
Great plan, guys. Good investment.
Yeah, and it's like, we were still building them in the Civil War, American Civil War. Mm-hmm. And so yes, sometimes some of this stuff makes sense, but not on this scale. Mm-hmm. There's something, and worldwide, there's star forts in Japan, America, Canada, all over the place. There's one way up near,
right.
Hudson's Bay that was.
How do people justify the similar engineering designs?
Well, the ones in America were smaller, and the French built a lot in Quebec and elsewhere up there.
But effectively, they almost look like they all almost look like they're coming out of the same architectural and engineering firm. You know what I'm saying? They're not deviating for geographical locations or people's, individual design specificities of the locale. They're very similar structures in cities. To me, it looks like,
Look at that. Mm-hmm. That's on a waterway. Now, they built their bastions and curtain walls facing inland, but no defenses on the waterway. That doesn't make sense to me. And there are whole cities that are split by 2 or 3 rivers. And so the fortifications are all split by these rivers. And it's like, well, okay, you can put chain or ships along the river to bar your enemies, but they also had ways to defeat that.
It seems to me, looking at these pictures, that this is more of a hydraulic activity than a defense system.
Exactly.
Big time.
There's a star fort in Kazakhstan. It's a famous picture. It looks so old, it looks biblical. And half of it has fallen away with a cliff, which begs the question, it looks to me like geologic time has passed over this star fort. And so the anomalies just rack up by the month. And I'm trying to make sense of it in a report. And I'm sure I'll get laughed at by everybody, but there's something very, very strange. I'm not saying they didn't build them within the time period. They may have found some as foundations and earthworks that were older, maybe a couple thousand years old, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
That would explain the idea. Well, we found this thing and we built it up, with logs and everything. It made a hell of a damn good fort.
Mm-hmm.
If you and I went into the woods with a bunch of our friends and say, okay, we're going to play capture the flag and drink beer. Well, if you and I found a hill
Mm-hmm.
and it had some of these zigzag, we'd be like, yeah, this is great.
Oh, yeah.
And we'd win the war probably, because we could defend our flag better. I'm not sure. No one is sure what's going on, but they've lied to us about history so much.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't surprise me that even if they did build these with engineers during the time period,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know the ethos behind all that, because these books don't tell you that. Mm-hmm. What is the inspiration for the design? What was the first star fort? There's no book that says the history of all star forts. There's only little pamphlets, thin little books like this that say Vauban designed this and the French army won these battles.
Mm-hmm.
End of story.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and here's a cartoon sketch. And so if you look at other aspects of military history, there's books this thick.
Mm-hmm.
And on one of the most important, expensive, architecturally sophisticated, hydraulic engineering subjects, I can only find this book on Ticonderoga. Mm-hmm. Doesn't say anything about building the fort. It's all just military history, that who used it and who won or lost. Mm-hmm. Nothing about the design of the fort at all. Nothing. And that is literally the thickest book I've found. And there's no drawings of anything.
I love this topic.
The Hudson River, that's all you get.
It's all about labor, and there's a lot to me. There's a lot of questions to be asked about. Edifice was when built is so massive, and it's like
skilled labor.
Yes,
these bastions are at an angle, so every stone has to be cut to be square on the back and angled at the front perfectly to match the angle of the bastion.
Yeah,
that's not easy to do. These were the cathedral builders. Mm-hmm. And these Freemasons had secret knowledge. I guarantee you that. I talked to one in the National Cathedral. He's like, you're on the right track. I'm a Freemason, he said, and I've been trying to figure out this stuff. That there's something, waveform generator, cymatics, sound resonance in cathedrals, and he's like, I'm trying to figure that out too. And I'm trying to get this scientist Eric Dollard. I'm writing this Starfort report for him.
Mm-hmm. I know that name. I think I've.
He's an electrical physicist.
And yeah.
He understands sound vibration, and he's the leading edge of physics on this stuff. And he's not a mainstream guy.
I have seen his stuff. I like what he's doing with what he's talking about with energy.
Yeah, with energy and sound waves.
I've come across his stuff.
Yeah. Here's the other weird thing, and I'll show you in my report.
Mm-hmm.
If you magnify snowflakes with an electron microscope, guess what they look like?
I've kind of already noticed that before. Yeah, they all look like snowflakes in some capacity.
I didn't find that. Someone else did. I've got every damn snow. They have perfect point bastions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a theory going around that snowflakes, because everyone's different, just like every star fort is different, that they're formed in the atmosphere through humidity and sound frequency. Mm-hmm. If that's true, we've got a smoking gun, which means this was about maybe warfare, but also maybe power generation and other things using the frequency of that area. Right. It's a wild set of theories, but they are cross-pollinating. And I put that in my report. As you and I know, with synchronicity, there's no such thing as coincidences. So
no, and it's just because we don't have an understanding yet of these materials doesn't mean that we can't understand that there's a phenomenon that could happen, right? Because we do know we can play with the phenomenon known as electricity, and that's simply taking other materials on this planet, taking some materials from the planet, combining them in a way that when we spin them, we get this amazing phenomenon that we call electricity, which is almost like magic, depending on how you want to discuss it. So maybe it turns out there's people that prior to us understood that if you take other materials, which might be massive amounts of earth and stone, and then spin water in them in a certain way, that you reap a phenomenon.
Yeah. I think I have a theory that holds water, that these military engineers, the Freemasons, back in the day, 1150 to 1850, they knew obviously some of the secrets of earth energy and how the universe works and electricity and all that, and water, hydraulics and electromagnetism. They knew that, and they designed that into all this, which would explain why there's unnecessary complexity. I mean, huge amounts of unnecessary complexity.
Right.
Militaries like things pretty simple.
Yes, these are not simple designs, and that's why, as a tradesman, I look at these structures as substantial effort being required.
Right, and so it would go a long way to explaining something. And then they were like, "Well, we'll carve out an embrasure for a cannon. That's what they're called, the ports. And it'll work fine." And probably the military commanders thought, "Well, this will work if we, this image has 100 cannon everywhere. You put enough cannon in it, you cut a hole in the wall, and you put a cannon anywhere." And so I think there's something like that going on here. The Freemasons of the day, they were definitely the same ones who built the cathedrals. Those people didn't grow on trees. They were specialists. And, you can't just be, no offense to, you can't just be a peasant from a farm and say, well, you got to come work on this. Sure, you can move earth, but you can't lay the stones and do that. That takes a lifetime of knowledge.
And that's why I get frustrated when people talk about Egypt and the slaves and stuff like that. And they're like, the pyramids were built by slaves. No, they weren't.
No, they weren't. It was a group project.
You cannot whip someone into skills. It doesn't work like that.
No. And so that's what the military guys I said, there was a lot of labor back then, but, a lot of it was unskilled. And well, that is interesting, but I don't know. There they are. They must have built them. And so I'm like, well, I'm not doubting that. I'm just adding, how did they build them? Why did they chose such and such a design? And why are some of these things so out of scale with their purpose? I mean, kings just don't blow a lot of dough on stupid things like this. I mean, this is not, these big things aren't like building a ship of the line. That's expensive, complex wood, brass, iron, technology.
Most people with resources understand getting a return on their investment.
Yeah, but I mean, you could build probably 100 ships or 200 for the cost of one of these damn star forts. That never see action. And the where they're scattered, it's like these old maps. They're just every willy-nilly little town.
It does seem that if you were to look at the big picture of the tactics of a nation, that the better investment at the time would have been savagely large navies.
Yes, and they did, but I think there's a lot easier ways to build fortifications than this giant.
Right.
Beautiful, harmonious, incredible work of art. Now, whenever a military, there's beautiful aircraft, and some people think tanks are beautiful. I don't know, but engineering-wise, there's beauty in everything. I'm not so sure about this whole. And when you look at it as a worldwide whole, I think there's 11,000 star forts so far, and they keep finding new ones every day.
And that's killing me. So if you're saying that those were all built in a similar time period, there's not enough skilled labor to do it in that time period.
Why would the Japanese build? I think they have 15 of them in Japan so far. They found. Why would they copy the West?
Right.
To the detail.
Right. Exactly.
The Japanese have incredible creative with their armor and their weapons, and they're like, to hell with it. Let's do it exactly like the French did it. And it's like, what?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
They're not dummies. The Japanese build incredible, throughout history.
They have plenty of their own original designs and engineering, which is amazing.
Yeah.
That stood the test of time.
I just find that very odd. And, there are star forts all over India that don't look very militaristic to me. There's one with there's one that's shaped like a star, and it's beautiful. And it has this pit with stairs that go down. It might be a well. That's shaped in the shape of a Maltese cross. You tell me the military value of that. Sure, it's hot in India. You need a well. They have these step wells. You need that. But the rest of the fort looks like a nightmare to fortify. It doesn't look military at all. And so there's all these strange things. And I'm trying to find another military historian to chime in here, because the other people have done good work, but they don't understand. They've not done the homework,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't understand the parts or the people involved. They just say Starfort's a weird man. Starfort, look at him, man. I think this was done by a magic wand and some aliens, and they're missing out. You got to understand your mainstream history before you can delve into alternative. But of course, everyone's an armchair conspiracy theorist or alternative historian. I mean, I battle with people over this Starfort thing, and they're like, "Oh, the mud flood was more important." I'm like, "What mud flood? It's just stupid." But here we have solid proof of something very complex.
Mm-hmm.
And again, back to our original conversation, this is all for war.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mass casualties, mass artillery fire. Sieging one of these Starforts was a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
Because the trenches you had to dig, this is the beginning of trench warfare. In the 1500s, they dug trenches for mortars and to undermine. So they did do a lot of undermining, just like castles. Mm-hmm. It was a nightmare for the attackers. You need 10-to-1 forces. That's the general rule. If you're going to attack a fortification, you need 10-to-1. And you're going to lose a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. So,
all this stuff is very interrelated in bizarre ways. But I find this topic fascinating. And there's two websites about Starforts, but those guys aren't military historians. They're just saying, wow, this looks like a harmonious, peaceful thing for the world. And, the ancients built them. And it's like, well, no, they were built for war, I think. But why? And why are there so anomalies? And some of them don't look like they were built for war at all.
I feel like they were resurfaced for war.
Yeah. Okay, it's a vantage point for a cannon, big deal. A hill will do that for you. Mm-hmm. A lot of the anomalies, but the other people, the one guy I talked to, he's like, I don't want to talk to you. I want to formulate my own, wizards and warlocks version of this. And I'm like, okay, don't you understand about Marshal Vauban and a 12-pounder cannon versus a 24-pounder versus a 12-inch mortar versus a 16-inch mortar? And he's like, no. And here's a guy who's a website for Starforts. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't want any more knowledge from me. And I'm like, I'm a military historian. Let's figure this out. And he's like, no.
There's a lot of folks that find things to be a curiosity, and they leave it at that.
Yeah. They're like, look at this weird shit.
Isn't that cool? Well,
okay.
Doesn't it cause a question in your head?
But
yeah, no, I get that.
How about cracking a fucking book? I mean, I can't make people into military historians. I have a passion for this stuff.
I've always liked the term elevate your mind.
Yeah.
Just as
people are like, no, I understand his angle. He wants to come up with his own theories. And I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. But you can't avoid, it's not like Starforts are that much of a mystery. They were built for war.
But then his theory would still have to stand up to questioning.
Yeah, and he just wants to, I don't know, smoke pot or do his thing. And I'm not going to name names, but, and the other guy just simply won't return my emails. Mm-hmm. And, these guys come out with websites on, anomalies of old buildings and doing all this stuff. And they're like, there's this one famous British guy and he's going, oi, look at this, mate. Look at this. And he does a great job of putting up all these obscure images from the last 1,000 years that are in archives, but he doesn't know a chimney from a fireplace. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, free energy fireplaces. And I'm like, no, that's for coal. And they're like the lightning rods and the ironwork on the 19th century Victorian houses, that's all free energy. And I'm like,
I hate all the snake oil salesmen just because there is the idea that we can have free energy. It doesn't mean that all these snake oil salesmen have accomplished it. It bothers me when I see all this stuff on the internet. Like, I'm in the heating industry as well.
There were certainly people in the 18th and 19th century who knew how to build some of these things, but there was nothing to be powered by electricity.
How many times have you seen on the internet these people that do these videos with like, here's how to heat your house in an emergency with a tea light candle and a clay flower pot. You just simply turn the flower pot upside down and you put the candle under it, and look, the clay pot gets warm so you can heat your house in an emergency. People, really? You think that the clay pot increases the BTUs of the tea light candle? Are you kidding me?
Nope.
This
Yeah,
is
if
like
your
the
house is a
lunacy of
micro
the.
house, you live in a little tiny room, yeah, maybe.
And then you see people doing it on the internet. They're like, "Oh, look, I put the thing on the thing, and look, it's so warm." And you're like, "Turn the heat off in your house now. Let me know how long you last with that little contraption, you knucklehead."
Well, as you and I know, there's a lot of disinformation, out there in the internet, and by a lot of that is due to the deep state or whoever
Yes.
putting out, let's distract, these idiots with this.
Was it Colby? Was it Colby, the director of the CIA back in the day, that said, "We'll start putting misinformation out into the American public, and when the day hits that when we see everybody just speaking gibberish, we know we've accomplished our mission."
And they did. We don't know what the truth is from anything, because we don't even know what the truth looks like anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think you and I do, because we're studied into this world of esoterica.
Oh, totally.
Mm-hmm. It's taken me a lifetime of studying military history, guns, ships, planes, tactics,
Mm-hmm.
the people involved, kings, queens, royalty, and then the last 15 years, the occult, and the Sufi wisdom, the mystery schools, the Egyptian mystery schools, the anti-gravity, the Freemasons, and the Hellfire Club. Holy shit!
It has taken a lot of effort on my part, John, I would say, and you must have done the exact same thing, but it has taken a lot of effort for me to be able to stand on my own 2 feet today and know when someone's lying to me.
Yeah,
and a lot of people don't have that anymore.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people mean well on the internet.
I get that.
Disclosure, alternative history, they mean well. But if you're a 21-year-old guy going, I'm going to put a website up for Star Forts, and then go out there and say the magic elves built them, and it's not helping so much. I've left my forum. I just can't. For every 10 minds that are digging into things with an open mind, there's 100 that say, I came here for the mud floods in Tartaria. And it's like, yes, Tartaria existed, but it's not this big conspiracy theory. There were some towns, the Russians incorporated it. They just said, oh, to hell with Tartaria. It's all Russia now. It's not that big of a deal. And they're thinking, no, the ancient world was there. Sure, I think in pre-Diluvian times, Siberia was warmer. There were a lot of towns, but I don't see giant crystal cities, any evidence of that. I'm not saying they're not underground somewhere. There's a lot of weird stuff going on our planet, but
that'd be a whole other story.
I just, I mean, I quit. I mean, it's insane. I can't talk sense to even some other historians who are way out of the box. I'm out of the box. Yeah, which box?
Exactly. That's the thing. Is that
bigger box.
Correct. And that's the thing that I think people I'm trying to do now is decompartmentalize everything, because I think that's what we're finding out is there's just so many different compartments. There's so many different areas that we've been corralled in with misinformation. It's like, choose whatever lie you want. Whatever, story you were told is probably not as accurate if you do more digging. And then, like you said, there's people that'll dig into this. There's people that want to look at that. There's people that don't want to look over here. But I think this is why we all as a group need to, at the very least, take the things that we are interested in and get to the actual root of the problem to get real truth on all of our topics, because I think you're right. What we're learning in our continued communications, John, is that we've been lied to on every level. It doesn't really matter which way we look, right? And I made the point before that, as recently as a CIA director was talking about confusing the masses. I don't think he was the first one to have that idea historically. I think this is an ongoing thing that folks like you and I see with great ease. We may not have all of the answers, but what we do know is the answers that are so easily distributed to the masses are just simply lies.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back 12,000 years to the Anunnaki, where the different bloodlines of human beings went out, the different 6 major bloodlines, I don't know. And what did the Anunnaki do? They kept them fighting amongst themselves, so they would be distracted, so they wouldn't rise up against their true masters, in the shadows, and it's gone down to today. And like I said, there's a lot of well-meaning people out there doing yeoman's work, but it's the people that broke this story was Sylvie Ivanova on the New Earth channel. And their stuff on Megalith was incredible. And then she drifted into prophecies, and I understand that we're all flawed. I'm sure I make mistakes every single day on a huge scale, but it's like there has to be not only a huge open mind, but also a measure of logic and reasoning that's just wanting. And it's like the disclosure movement at large. It's factionalized, and there are different factions and groups, and the bottom is the people who believe in the wild stuff and the super soldiers, and everyone else is like this. Stay away with your wild stuff. Chris Mellon, why are you and Tom DeLonge with the wild stuff? And it's like 30 years ago, when Stephen Greer, Richard Dolan, and Stephen Bassett, and Linda Moulton Howe, and other people, 35 years ago, were talking about UFOs and military abductions and the Greys, guess what people were calling them? Madmen and madwomen. 35 years later, or whatever, Stanton Friedman was, he's a UFO nut. All my friends call me a UFO nut. Now that's funny and everything, but that's it. They don't call you a UFO enthusiast. They call you a nut, a tinfoil hat, propeller beanie. I make fun of it. I actually have a propeller beanie.
Oh, nice.
I should have worn it today. And it's everything is factionalized, everything. And so now people are like, oh no, this secret space program and all these super soldiers, no way. And it's like, that's what they were saying about these UFOs. Foundational people who did foundational work. They did huge amounts. 30 plus years ago, they were calling them crazy. And I don't want to, oh no, there's no aliens involved. It's all, just the military. And no, they were all called crackpots and everything. Now they're doing the same to you, me, and the whole, the wild stuff. I
like how folks, they're now saying, oh, the government is now telling us that UFOs are real. And it's like, hold on a second. UFOs have always been real. The only thing the government's done is change their position on being honest about it.
Yeah.
They're just admitting they were lying. That's what's going on. They didn't just let us know UFOs are real. They let us know they're going to stop lying about it.
Well, Chris and Elizondo are very careful with their words. And if you study their interviews, they just say, we don't know what this thing is. It's a UAP. It's doing all these strange things. We're not sure whose it is. And they kind of hint that it might be Russia and China, which is always a possibility. I think the Tic Tac they had in the video, the Nimitz video, is ours. It's a Lockheed Martin. It's the successor to the TR-3B Black Triangle. That's the word out there. I believe it. And where did we get that from? Well, lo and behold, the stories that Charles Hall did about the tall whites being at Indian Springs and S4 out at Area 51, they flew around in white Tic Tacs. And he describes them in his book. And his book was written, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. And all of a sudden, what shows up on CNN is a Tic Tac. And there you go. It's ours. So Chris and Elizondo are, they're backpedaling. If someone says, well, what if that's alien? They'd say, oh, no. Now we can tell you it's a Lockheed Martin XB147AZ1, and they have an out because they weren't lying when they said, oh, no, we don't think it's an alien craft. It's probably someone else's. Well, they were lying. They, Lockheed Martin and Boeing and everyone else test their craft. They fly something out, and the military guys are like, "Holy shit!"
And they could know it's a Lockheed unit for all I know, which means that when they say they don't know, they're still just lying. They can get away with saying they don't know. I guess it's a great plausible thing because at any point in time, you can then gain knowledge and say, "At that point, I didn't know, but now I do know."
Yeah, it's plausible deniability, man.
They've
written on their
saying you don't know doesn't mean you don't know. You could be lying still.
And the funny thing is, I think they've been briefed with a report that's that thin.
Oh, totally understood.
And they say, oh, don't worry. There was the one Roswell craft. We back engineered all this amazing stuff just from that one. And they probably believe that.
One of my videos that I discussed recently, I thought was really it's really funny to me. I don't know if it came across to everybody else, but you know as well as I do that there's people out there that are interested in the things that I do, and they will probe. So there's like agents, right? And it's like you said, they get these reports, right? And sometimes they get a thick one, sometimes they get a thin one. And since everything in the government is compartmentalized on a need-to-know basis, I always think it's really funny when you're getting approached by a gentleman who got the same paper-thin report as 4 other people that have been there before, and he was never told about them.
Yep.
So those conversations to me are hilarious because this guy is so not in the know, but thinks that he is. And I love those.
I think, personally, in 10 years, Chris and Elizondo are going to be like, oh, shit. They lied to us about everything. And these idiots, Warner and Hecker are out there telling people stuff that we should have known 10 years ago.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I truly believe that because, I mean, I told Chris, I said, everyone's compartmentalized. Who knows what's going on in that room over there?
Exactly. They only know what they're being spoon-fed.
And he's like, oh, no, we. And it sounds funny, but it's not, because you and I know the greater possibilities.
I know that someone like
absolutely horrifying.
I know someone like Chris Mellon's not doing the research himself. He's facilitating.
Well, he told me he had a UFO club in high school, so he was interested in the subject way back, like I was. I just read books.
Understood. Interested, like that other guy that you were telling me had a website that was interested in star forts.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
so I think he's someone that went into the military intelligence complex, saluted the flag, as I probably would have done. Although I'm such a wacky thinker, it wouldn't have lasted with me. And they said, you're a great guy. We're going to make you Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and here's the report. And we want, and he's like, they would have told me if this wild stuff that you and Tom DeLonge and everybody else out there is talking about was true, they would have told me.
Industries maintain, and those seats that get filled rotate. And the industry does not care to inform the rotating personnel in the seat.
Why, if Joint Chiefs of Staff and presidents are not told the full Monty,
then they're not telling Chris. They're only telling Chris what they want Chris to know.
Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. I mean, no, they're not going to give anyone in government or military the full deal. Not
ever. That's why people can't look. They can't look to the government for disclosure because the government doesn't possess it.
No, the Congress doesn't. And a few people like my dad who were given, 3 pages. Oh, sure, Roswell, and don't worry, we've got everything in hand, and just do the black budget and shut up and do your job. He was like, yes, sir. But he didn't, he knew about the Majestic 12 files and he knew about Area 51, but he didn't know the extent of it all. They thought, oh, well, we just have a couple of craft and maybe something the Germans cobbled together with baling wire and toothpicks, and maybe a bell in there with terrible radiation that killed people, and did all that. But no, it's ancient aliens and von Daniken. Man, I remember reading his book in 1973 when I was 11 years old. And in fact, I put a picture on my website of me. I had it in a camp, wrapped in a blanket. And I said, I have my Chariots of God, because my camp counselor in my cabin was, a Christian type. And he was like interested that I was reading this interesting book at 11 or 10. Actually, I was 10. And I said, oh, it's all about, ancient aliens, maybe missing link. And he was furious. He ripped one of my books in half. He said, don't you, God hates you. It was another person who used the Lord's name in vain against me. This is against God. And so I hid it. I hid the book, The Chariots of the God. It was actually not mine. It was a friend of mine's from another cabin. He said, my God, don't show the counselors. They'll rip it up. But I remember in 1973, that was a big deal. And, or 1972, I think it was. It was a big deal. Von Daniken wrote it in 67. Wow.
He was ahead of his time.
A lot of disclosure for worldwide ancient stuff. But because it was all in the past, it's like Ancient Aliens. And Chris Mellon show, what was it called? Unacknowledged or something, up on the History Channel. above top secret, whatever that bullshit was. It's like if you put things in the past, nobody cares because that happened 20,000 years ago. Sure,
Right.
an alien planted a flower. No big deal. Don't listen. And so, Ancient Aliens is actually not too bad for people that aren't in the know. They're like, maybe this happened. That's not a bad way to sort of drip things. But it comes off, the guy with the big hair, David Wilcock, and some of those people come, not that they're bad people, they just come off looking like nut jobs.
And I think there's a certain amount of production that goes on with that. I've been chased around by some camera crews, and it's actually extremely challenging to maintain yourself on camera. They work very hard to modify you from who you are. They try.
Yeah. But it is interesting that we have shows like that on the History, which is probably owned by one of the Viacom or something.
Yeah. It's a limited hangout. If they have a certain amount of information being thrown out there, then that's
as concepts.
Yeah,
and some of it's not bad. I think some of it's pretty good, but they couch it in such a way. It happened so long ago. We may never know. There's
it makes them the authority. If you're the conversation starter, you're the authority. If you want to talk about the ancient alien connection, guess where the conversation is going to start with? An episode of Ancient Aliens. And that's why they do that. They make the show, and then they control the playing field.
Yeah, it's. I think in 10 or 15 years, I think everyone, no matter what color your hat is, everyone realizes that this is all coming out. It's the age of Aquarius. The 60s hippies started the whole thing of consciousness expansion. They're backpedaling awful hard to try to slow it down. With various distractions and protests and violence and this election nonsense. They're trying to keep people distracted and slow it down, but they know it's inevitable. Otherwise, you and I would never have met. We wouldn't be talking about this. We'd be talking about tall ships. It's, they know that it's coming. It's just, human beings are waking up. You and I woke up at an early age, basically, but there are people that, gosh, I didn't believe in this stuff before last year, but today, I'm open to it. That's showing you that.
I do see us going in that direction, and I have a question. We're getting to the tail end. We've been talking for a while now, but I want to wrap up with a question, and you don't have to answer it right now, but I want to throw it out there, and if anybody else out there wants to answer and comment below. But considering the level of misinformation that we're at now through the entire mass of the planet, right? I would say we're all highly misinformed in mass right now. But I wonder how long it's been since the vast majority of the people on this planet were properly informed together. How long ago? I wonder on that. Like, we're so misinformed right now in mass, and we do have cycles. I wonder when the hell was the last time on this planet we were all accurately on the same page?
I'd have to say before the Great Flood. After the Great Flood, there was kings and royalty that knew some of the history, and they kept it alive. And the mystery schools, some of the engineering that the Freemasons and the Egyptians had, and some of that to use in cathedrals and star forts and other constructions.
Okay.
They had some of that pre-Diluvian knowledge that Earth was a Grand Central Station, and it was no big deal. Every day in Atlantis, there were people of all different sizes and colors from everywhere in the galaxy and beyond. And so it was an international, very erudite and high civilization that just fed.
But now, following this question to its literal conclusion, you said pre-Diluvian, pre-flood, right?
Yeah.
When would you literally say, how long ago was that actually in the grand scheme of the misinformation that we've been presented?
Well, the geologists like Robert Schoch dated the bathtub trench of the Sphinx in the Giza Plateau to 12,500 years, somewhere, give or take 100 years or so, because of the erosion patterns of the water. Where'd that water come from? Could have been related to the Great Flood. I'm not sure. But from what I've been told, and I've interviewed some archaeologists and geologists, the rock strata doesn't lie.
Mm-hmm.
Archaeologists lie all day long. Whoa. And the layers around the world strongly suggest that there was a cataclysm somewhere around 12,500 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
give or take a few hundred years, in that flexible, but basically that time period.
Mm-hmm.
And it's evident.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey has been dated to 12,500 years ago by geologists. You know, Schmidt, the guy, the head archaeologist, did a smart thing.
Mm-hmm.
He knew, and so now National Geographic and the Royal Society, everyone's like, wow, civilization's older than we thought.
Mm-hmm.
That's because they were pushed.
Mm-hmm.
Before it was 6,000 years. It's more than double that.
I think it's a lot longer than this, because even when you talk about Göbekli Tepe being 12,000 years ago of being a substantial civilization and a flood, to me, that can be true. And it can also be true that that flood occurred and we still had not risen to the level of elevation from a prior position. Still, like, it doesn't mean that the last flood was the one that knocked us from our highest level of elevation. It could still just be another flood that was happening in our recurring cycle. So that still doesn't lead back to the original question of how long ago since we were all informed. We still really don't know from the angle that you went.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I
Right.
would say before the Great Flood, but you also have to take into account the possibility of under-earth, inner-world civilizations that, you know,
That may have learned eons ago to avoid the flooding cycles. Right.
And a lot of the stories purport that a lot of Atlanteans were like, we're moving underground. The rest of the people were like, you're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You remember in the original Superman movie where his father Jor-El said the planet Krypton is breaking up, and all the scientists were like, nah, it's shifting its orbit. You're an idiot. Mm-hmm. And of course he was proven right, but he died in it. Right. I think there was some of that going on. That's also a parable, I think, the whole Superman story. That a lot of people were like, okay, have fun. And they just moved underground. You know, they had all this high technology. They were probably a fifth density society with all those kinds of powers and skills. And so they did that. And of course, there were some other people hanging out there that have civilizations under the earth for, I don't know, billions of years. You know, this planet, people love to think it's just the surface. It's like, no.
Exactly. That's the direction I'm going.
Not all lava down there. There's
right.
some lava vents.
Exactly. That's what I was getting at. So when you talk about going back to being totally informed and you start talking about flooding issues, that would be surface history. Maybe that's not the extent of us being informed. If our history goes beyond the surface to a point of depth, it's it just keeps going and going. And that's where I think it's so amazing, this whole circle of life. And where does it begin and where does it end? And I'm amazed at how many people, from our surface perspective, in the short chronological window of time that we've been functioning in, can be so animated about what they know, you know? We know this to be true. Like,
I don't know anything.
Yeah. All I know is what I've
lied to. That's certain. I've found that in the history books. It can't be that much of a typo. It's a mass. You can prove it, but getting people to listen. I can prove that this doesn't make sense in the military, but people don't understand that. They're not military historians. They don't understand cannons. They don't understand, hydraulics or bricklaying or anything. You have to understand all that backstory to do your argument. Most people are like,
I like the logic that you applied, that if the king invested in that and he fortified that whole area, and then it turns out that nobody wound up going there, and that it was a total waste. Technically, it was a poor choice on his call.
Well, they'll tell you it did its job by avoiding contact with the enemy armies. It did its job. We fortified the city. It did its job. Fair point. But it's when you aggregate all the little anomalies. I can't go into a historical court of law and prove my case. They just, all those people are.
And even that theory, correlation is not causation. So just stating that it didn't get attacked, you can't say, well, that's because we made such a good wall. It doesn't work that way.
That was the excuse.
Yeah, that's shenanigans.
If I had an army, some of these places I would avoid, but it's like go around. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases, I look at the maps And I'm like, okay, they put 3 starforts here. Why didn't they go around over here?
Mm-hmm.
Silence.
Okay.
I mean, that's the way history is presented to us in these books and films, is just like, this happened. This is why they built it. Go home, do your homework, and watch The Simpsons.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's like, ooh, I'm so informed, you know. And it's like, I'm looking for the stuff that's not printed, and it's painstaking work.
Yes.
And you have to have the mindset for it. I mean,
to look for what's missing in the story.
We'll be lucky to get in 25 years 5% of the planet on board with any of this disclosure stuff. I mean it. I'm not putting people down. It's just, we're different.
I had higher hopes in 2020 that people were waking up and were moving in the right direction. Now,
so. My nephew,
2021, I just see people being happy to do whatever they're told.
Less so now with the COVID thing, but there's not as many people balking at these masks and everything that I had hoped for. They just sort of, you know, everyone's paranoid, and, you know, in Florida, you can get fined, you know. It's madness. The other thing I think that I should share with you is I always want to think positive. You know, things will get better, but the time we're in now, the next 10 years, 15 years, it's going to suck.
Yeah.
No one seems to be waking up. There's a minority of us sort of, you know, waking up to a lot of possibilities and theories and things like that make sense if you do your homework. You know, half the people that comment, they've watched 10 or 15 videos and then this guy's full of shit. Based on what? You know, I'm sure I'm full of shit on some things, but it not by choice. But it doesn't seem to me, you know, it seems to me that we're going to be this minority going forward. And the only reason I can think of that they're doing Ancient Aliens and they're doing this Chris Mellon, Elizondo thing and the Nimitz stuff is because someone is pressuring the military, industrial, corporate intelligence complex. Some factions, you know, other factions are like, fuck you. But a lot of them. Is it any different from?
Is it any different from them making TV shows like Star Trek back in the day, where we know it was like obviously disclosure going on? I look at this stuff that's going on. I don't really see it as disclosure. I look at it as industry and technology conditioning, because they have to have a certain amount of the future to have people look. We want the next new thing. Yeah, I mean, there is an industrialization to this process and a rolling out of stuff.
I think there's a lot of factions. I think in the military and industrial corporate blah 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 that say we need recruits. We're not getting enough, you know, kidnapping them and doing all these, you know, horrid, you know, monarch child programs and shit like that. It's like, that's not enough. We need to get the public up to speed, you know, on certain things so that they'll volunteer for the Space Force, the Marines or whatever, and say, my God, we've got enemies. You know, they're pushing the enemy thing, which is partially true. But then unfortunately, the enemy is all around us, inside, everywhere. It's all asymmetrical, you know, and so there's no us versus them, but they're pitching that as a recruitment program, because the secret stuff, you know, the kidnapping and all that super soldier stuff, that's not providing the man and woman power needed. And it's remarkable, with all that technology, you still need trained personnel, highly trained personnel. And I think there's been advancements in holographic and virtual reality technology that they might be able to take a 17-year-old kid from Kansas, you know, with a high school ed, and put him in a room, and within a year, he's ready to rock and roll out there. Yeah. With, you know, in certain cases, with alters and with whatever's needed for his specifying mission, or whether he's going to be on this defense force or this, you know, operation, ready to go. Where it took 21 years of a lifetime from childhood being tortured and other things like that, you know, they could do it really fast. Yeah, they don't need to, you know, they could fracture the mind with electronics and you know, some sort of virtual reality, holographic, you know, quantum technology that's far superior.
Yeah, they could just expedite.
You know, I don't see a lot of people out there if they need soldiers, putting people through lifetime, 21-year programs to get them up to speed, I think they can do it in a few months with technology.
It literally goes right
Ready
back
to
to that.
rock and roll.
Goes
Yeah,
right
you
back
ready
to
to
that
rock and roll?
cloner planet concept that I was talking about in Star Wars. Like literally the idea of being able to rapidly manufacture troops. I mean, that's what they were doing. We're
Yeah,
just, in another angle, we're just rapidly manufacturing labor.
I mean, I'm sure there is a place like that doing things like that. That's against galactic law or whatever have you. And they're like, fuck those wimps and suckers. We're going to do this. Just like there's a secret underground base somewhere in the United States, doing horrible stuff and cloning and whatever else. According to Emery Smith, they're splicing in all kinds of DNA from ETs and animals and everything into certain super soldiers to get them killed.
Excuse me.
I can swim underwater for 12 hours. I can jump a 30-story building. I can survive multiple hits, and doing all this chimera stuff.
Part of me is concerned that I know that I've actually been exposed to being underwater for a freakishly long time, and I'm still here.
Yeah, I told you I had that weird dream that I was some sort of combat soldier underwater with a dry bag and some sort of recirculating breathing suit. That was a really weird, vivid dream I had. I'm not claiming was in the programs or anything. I've had a lot of these dreams where, and I was like, there was a delay and there was a line of soldiers and we're all on this tow line, 50, 60, 100 feet underwater. And we're just hanging out, waiting for them to pull us. And I was like, can't wait to do my job. Can't wait to kill the baddies. Can't wait to, I was just this other person. I was like 18 or 20 or something. I was young. And I was just like, and I woke up feeling, it wasn't the dream that, I have a lot of weird dreams. It was just the feeling that it was so nonchalant. I don't know what I was going to go do. I couldn't wait to get my weapon in gear and start, wasting people. I was so proud of being where I was and doing what I was and being part of some elite team. And I was like, whistling to myself. And someone said over the intercom, and I said, shut up, because, secure comms. And I thought that was really weird. I have a vivid imagination. So, I don't put it past my imagination. But that was weird, the feeling of being young. I'm always young. And I have these weird dreams. I'm younger. I'm 30. I'm strong again. I'm not some old goat. And how nonchalant I felt about going into combat. Like I couldn't wait. Can't wait to kill. Can't wait. That's really odd. And so
we know it can be programmed in.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at maybe is we're looking at it within 10 years that not only are thousands of people coming forward about stories of being in the programs, but millions. And that's why I think part of this military industrial complex, sort of maybe disclosure that really isn't is out there, because it's like
I can follow that.
They can't control people waking up to this reality.
They may have realized they made an error. That's possible, and they have to make a correction. I mean, maybe they did think that they could process tens of millions of hundreds, let's say through the years. Let's just say, argument's sake, let's just say they were processing every kid in one of these programs for decades. But maybe their intention was that they thought they'd get away with it because that no one would ever remember. But now what if it turns out, hey, turns out we were wrong and we're learning that they're all going to remember. Then what do?
Yeah.
Now what do? Oh, we were wrong. They are going to remember, it turns out, in time. Now what do?
Yeah. I had a conversation with someone, in the disclosure movement by email. I said, they didn't believe in all that. They just said, oh, that's just kids coming forward, playing, metal music and pretending there's, the games really are clever. Because then they're like, oh, you just saw that on a super soldier game called Halo. And so I'm thinking that was clever to come out with those games, but not when there's tens of thousands of people coming out. And I think that's going to happen. I really do. Then you're not going to be able to say, well, all these people, because these stories are not heroic. They're not fun. They're horrifying. And one only has to look at Tony Rodriguez and Penny and James Rink and Liana, all those people, the horrors they went through year after year, decade after decade. And most people won't be able to understand that even as a concept.
Mm-hmm.
But those who do, it's going to come a tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a tipping point, and I think it's within 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And like all the other times in history when the American military complex is trying to play catch up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the Vietnam War truth is coming out with the Pentagon players. What do? Backpedal, catch up, backpedal. We got to get ahead of this. We got to get ahead of this and put out disinformation. And they're backpedaling.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have Chris and Elizondo and maybe a couple others coming forward and saying, I saw a UFO off the fantail of a carrier. Big deal. Mm-hmm. It's because maybe they've got to come to terms with that blank slate technology didn't work as well as they thought. The planetary vibration may be rising quicker than they thought, probably. If I have to, I've had a long history with the American military and Navy. Mm-hmm. Man, they play catch up a lot of times. Well, shit, we didn't know with the Russian submarine. Now they're playing catch up. It's kind of like that. It's mm-hmm. this black hat, USAP, black programs, people that are like, well, we've been playing with powers of God or demigods all this time. But remember, they only think one way. And they're very, by all accounts, they're very rigid in their thinking. Not a lot of creativity going on, and so I think that's a big chink in their armor. These black programs that have ruled is that the blank slate technology didn't work that well, mm-hmm. and they say only 3% of the people remember their memories. Oh, I bet you it's more. It's increasing by the day.
I think it's more and it's increasing, and I think because someone remembering their memories, okay, it doesn't make them functionally useful memories for them. So waking up in and of itself still doesn't really accomplish much, other than confusion for the person waking up. It's not an inherent threat to the system to have people wake up, because just simply waking up doesn't give them the answers. It just gives them confusion.
Yeah.
And then they need to keep us separated from each other, because when we communicate and we connect, then the confusion goes away.
Yeah. That they can't keep doing that forever. And
correct.
Michael Jaco just came out. I mean, he's a guy who Navy SEAL, and mm-hmm. all of a sudden people at the conference, said, "Oh, I remember you," and whoa. Mm-hmm. And so he's been, waking up all of a sudden. He does a great channel with his channel. I forget what it was called, but
I've seen some of his stuff. I used to be friends with him on Facebook before I got thrown off, and before he even started having these connections, I was communicating to him behind the scenes, because some of the stuff that he was saying was still giving me connections. Yeah. And he hadn't even made any connections yet, so I thought it was really funny. And now he's out making connections.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched a bunch of his videos, and he's pretty stand-up guy, U.S. military, salute the flag, And now he's like, whoa, all this stuff is coming out. And, he's going through that process. I think we're going to see that on a larger scale.
I actually would like to see that a lot more because of the veteran aspect.
It's in conjunction with all kinds of cosmic things going on and other things. It's all aggregating and coming together. And that tipping point, I think, is within 15-year window. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a shit show. Mm-hmm. Because the 98% of the public worldwide, forget it. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're going to be just bewildered. But the 2% of the world, or whatever it is, in 10 or 15 years, it's going to be insane. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it won't be pretty. It's not going to be this, wonderful unicorns and,
Yeah,
he's getting out there. It's going to be a shit show.
I was using the term confusion politely, because I think it's going to be more traumatic. So it's not like folks are going to really wake up and instantaneously have the wherewithal to get justice from the government that wronged them. That's not going to be their first thought. It's just going to be trauma and pain and not knowing, because everything's now different.
There's a lot of sources out there saying that in 2025, mm-hmm. there's going to be the first level of public contact with ETs. Mm-hmm. And that's been going on the last 10 years, but I've heard that date. It's all flexible, obviously, but mm-hmm. it wouldn't surprise me that this military-industrial corporate complex at least broaches that and say, oh, here's Mr. X. He's this 7-foot tall blonde Nordic guy. He's the nicest guy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, he's been helping us with some of our technologies, helping us fight the bad guys, and at the very least, we're over this hump that UFOs and extraterrestrials are still, a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
That hump all of a sudden dissolves, which makes everyone's job in the disclosure movement that much easier to going forward. So I hope that's true, that will happen. It's got to happen sometime. Mm-hmm. Everyone's like, well, we need open contact. Well, there's been open contact. The problem, and I'm very angry about this, is that ETs have only met with certain dignitaries in secret.
Mm-hmm.
What good is that for the planet?
Mm-hmm.
Everything's a goddamn secret. Everything is compartmentalized. Everything is national security stamped all over it. It's not helping the everyday people.
It just goes to show.
There's got to be a tipping point.
That shows me that we're apparently not being visited by the awesome benevolent ones.
Well, I think we are, but we've also had a history of the guys who aren't.
Oh, that's what I'm getting at. The secrecy. The whole secrecy thing to me is repugnant of the non-benevolent species.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
But there are signs. All these wars we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
These are wars between light and darkness. So when we just fight proxy war, World War II was a close-run things. The Nazis didn't sign off on it, but everyone else, the Allies kind of won. And I think that was a victory for the side of the light, mm-hmm. Barely. And that's how wars are fought. It's like, it's not just, the Americans did their atrocities too. We got to stand up and no one's a saint.
Right.
But technically speaking, all you have to be is 51% on the side of the positive mm-hmm. to gain that gold star or whatever. Enough gold stars, you can mail it in with your box tops and you get a free planet. I don't know. But, it's something like that.
And a bag of sea monkeys.
So it's not just guys on both sides going, yeah, we're going to kill all these people and give them to the bad guys as war prizes, which they did. But sometimes deals had to be made with people that are not evil and not good, but somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. It's like, sure, we'll help you win World War II, but what's in it for us? Mm-hmm. And it's like Star Trek, the Captain Picard or Kirk, they gotta make deals with people. Sometimes these deals are seedy. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, they're morality plays, the Star Trek things, but probably in real life, they're dealing with these traders and people that are going to give you technology. But it's like, well, the only thing they want is human genetics. We got to give it to them. But for the greater good, this is what we've got to do. And I think we've had many incidences that I think in the 50s, General Eisenhower was given Hobson's choice by 3 ET groups that were all kind of working in with each other. They're like, this guy's a sucker. Mm-hmm. And maybe there was one benevolent group that came in and said, hey, we'll help you with your spirituality. It's like, screw you. We want our supersonic jets and atomic bombs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because the Cold War mentality, Ike wasn't privy to the top level stuff. I don't know why. Everyone's like, he's a great president. All he did was play golf and fuck us over. He had that one chance to overrun Area 51 with the First Army out of Colorado, and he didn't do it because they wrote him a report. That's a military commander of Allied forces? I mean, I would have had the First Army there the minute I found there was any skullduggery mm-hmm. going on. I wouldn't take the chance.
The report was probably very accurate anyhow.
Yeah, it was just a little, yeah, sure, we have some spacecraft, big deal. Go away, Mr. President. And he realized at the end of his presidency he'd been had, but I got fooled. What kind of overall Allied commander is that? Man, if I heard Alan Dulles and the CIA was out in Nevada doing secret stuff without my knowledge, I would have been out there with 3 armies. Mm-hmm. I'm not kidding. That's prudency of a president. He was like, well, I didn't have a problem with secrecy. I had a problem with the chain of command. And I said, that's a huge problem. And Kennedy tried to do the same thing. And by that time, Alan Dulles and Majestic 12 and all those guys were super powerful. I tried to do it, I think, in 1958. And I think he might have been almost too late then. But why he didn't do that, maybe they mind controlled him, I don't know, maybe something happened, but he didn't. He had that chance to overrun Area 51 with the First Army. He didn't do it.
Jeez.
I mean, I don't know what, it's easy to be, in hindsight, armchair historian, but God almighty.
Yeah, I guess maybe he was just hopeful that he was not being misled. But I think
that proves that he really was naive, and he had a stroke. That was another factor in this. He'd had several strokes by this time, and that does mess with you. So he's got some excuses for that, but what a shame. I mean, the bloodshed we could have potentially avoided by, I think even if the American public was made aware in 1958 of, they still would have been like, we got to fight the Russians, bring in more flying saucers. And
I'm a firm believer that if we actually were just honest with everybody, we could handle all truths. I mean, I get the idea that we're constantly being told about why things have to be secreted, but I disagree entirely. I mean, I get that there's people that stand on that side of the aisle and present that debate, but I don't ever agree with it. It'll be too shocking. Nope. That's what you're speculating to suppose to maintain this line that I disagree with entirely, because more often than not, the people that like to maintain that line, I'm sorry, they profit in it somehow. The existence of the line is profitable for them on that side that want to maintain it.
Right. Even the staunchly religious around the world, all religions, the staunch, and this stuff is going to come out eventually within our lifetime, I think. They will rationalize it in their reality and just say, well, the reason this truth is coming out is because God willed it so.
Oh, totally. Yes.
And so I don't see this mass panic of people because it's like all you need is an imam or a bishop to get up there and go, hey, we live in a big universe. We knew that God works in mysterious ways. That's their big act. Plausible deniability.
They're not about to undermine their own pulpit. I guarantee you that much.
Yeah. I'm not big on religions, but I respect people's spirituality and faith. I believe in religious freedom in the United States and the Constitution. But, I don't see this mass panic. I think that's an excuse.
Totally.
Chris Mellon mentioned something that in our
they
thing.
They say things like that to bring people in. That's brainwashing.
We can't let it out. People will panic. And it's like some will panic. Most won't.
I just start with, no, you're wrong. Where did you get your intel? Because how do you test that theory?
How do you test that theory? And
how do you test the theory? You're suggesting everybody's going to lose their skulls when I suggest that everyone's just going to be fine. So how about we just do what I say?
The only time they really tested it was 1939 when CBS got Orson Welles and they did War of the Worlds radio show.
Which is not a viable test of releasing a truth. That's a viable test of attempting to scare the crap out of people, which they learned and then they applied in the mass media every day since.
Yeah, but it was cobbled up, I think, by FDR and the Secret Service and FBI. I don't know. There was a group of people who cobbled that up, and they wanted to test because they knew World War II was where they were on the eve of World War II and the Foo Fighters and everything, and they thought, what if the public catches wind? We need to test their, and what it proved was, if you look at a lot of the statistics on that thing, far more people did not panic than those who did.
Right.
I think it's like a 25 versus 75% ratio. A lot of people just grabbed their guns and I knew it, goddamn Martians, and stood on the porch with a loaded shotgun. And a lot of people panicked and got in their cars, I think in New Jersey, and they were like, oh my God, they'd landed in Paramus or something. And, but for some reason after that, they were able to contain, the Foo Fighter story got out to the public, but it was all a mystery. German secret weapon, Japanese secret weapon. No. But, now today, everyone thinks it's a rock band from the 90s.
Good band, by the way.
Name from it, and I write this in my book. And in the foreword, it's not the rock band; it was based on something else. And so I don't, there will be people who will panic. There will more people who won't, who said, I knew it. I knew it all along.
Yep.
You know, the hard stuff, the really hard, horrible stuff, that will really bum people out to a huge degree. But come on, we've lived through Vietnam, World War II, Korea, the Holocaust.
And that's appropriate, right? All of these things are appropriate. The people should know the truth. The bad things should make people have knots in their stomach, and then those people should react and then do what is right to the people that were doing the wrong things. This is how life works. You know, by secreting things away and keeping people from having that knot in their stomach prevents them from being agitated to remove the problem.
Yeah, I mean, people, it was very hard after World War II, but I do commend Ike and Patton and others who liberated the death camps. They brought in the Army G2 cameraman and said, this has no way they're going to let us cover this up. So he did do that. I give him credit because there were apparently, supposedly, a lot of people in the American defense business in 45 who said, you need to cover this up and make it go away. And the Russians were kind of on board with that, I think. But it got out, and you know the world handled that. That was very hard. It's still hard to look at those films and everything, and you know, but we handled it.
We absolutely handled it, and you could never tell me that we shouldn't have released the truth.
Yeah. So the whole argument that people will panic and all this stuff is only partially true. It's not. It's mostly bullshit.
It's total baloney to protect the criminals.
Yeah, it's crap.
It's criminal talk.
Yeah. Now the esoteric stuff and the child trafficking and the human trade, that's going to be very, very, very dark and disturbing.
We weren't here to put people in positions that prevent them from being shocked by the truth.
No.
We weren't put here to prevent people from getting the truth either.
Yeah.
You know, so all of these actions of misinformation, disinformation, and just straight out lies, to me, it should be intolerated, and anybody who can argue from a position of trying to substantiate it to me is out of their mind.
Yeah, it's meant as the argument is, and it's falling apart. Otherwise, we wouldn't have factions in the Pentagon trying to leak this stuff out. You know, it's falling apart. The argument of that is faulty. What they're really afraid of is everyone getting in and being angry. And occupying the CIA and the Pentagon and Lockheed Martin and Boeing Defense and Sandia Labs, really by the millions. That's what they're afraid of. Is this is going to collapse the whole business side, the money laundering, the bank fraud, all that. That's what they're really afraid of. Is not people panicking, people getting angry. And boy.
It's just like being kids.
Peaceful protests, but
it's just like being kids. Something goes wrong, and everyone's like, "You gotta be quiet. We can't say anything." Why? Because we'll get in trouble. That's all it really boils down to. Like, people will flip out. Who will flip out? Mom and dad will flip out. So we better be quiet. Like, that's the only reason for secrecy. When they say like everyone will flip out. Yeah, on you, the guys holding the secrets.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very disheartening when people slowly realize that. You know, we've made a lot of bad deals with a lot of bad groups of people and ETs for our survival. You know, supposedly that was the argument for our survival. But man, they don't want that. You know, because people will lose faith in America. And I mean, what America? It's only factions. You know, I do side with the Navy and the Marines because they answer to the Constitution, which represents the American people. They do not answer to a commander-in-chief because that's transient. You know, but these black program people who have held power and sway over everyone else in the military and stuff, those people, I mean, you know, they'll go down fighting. They'll go down dying. You know, they just don't know any other mindset, the psychopath's mindset. But I think we're getting a lot of people who've been blackmailed, and those people are willing to jump sides very quickly. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing little bits of that happening. It makes sense. You know, Stephen Greer makes a good case for that in a lot of his work. There wouldn't be these people coming out and telling us all this stuff if there wasn't a strong motive to do so, because it's very dangerous. It means their very lives. Now, you and I wouldn't be afraid because we know death is an illusion, but most people aren't on board with the truth of the universe and reincarnation. They're like, oh no, I don't want to die. And it's like, what's the big deal? You've died 1,000,000 times before. It's not that big a deal, but people are very afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's a huge mess. It's a huge challenge, both, intellectually, spiritually, everything, metaphysically, philosophically. I mean, it's just a mess.
A lot of stuff to go through.
But we got to try. We all have
absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, that's what we're doing, John. And I do appreciate all of the time that you gave me here today as we work on these things. I love chatting with you, and time flies.
Oh, it's fun.
Yeah, it's a blast. I'm very interested in this Starfort stuff. Maybe we'll bring the conversation in.
Yeah, it's a really bizarre thing, but there's definitely something weird going on with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get to the bottom of it. I don't know anyone, other military historians, taking an alternative view of this that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, as far as I know, I'm the only one, with any kind of background that's tackling this.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully there'll be others. I could use the help. But I think we need people that understand electromagnetism and electricity and water flow and other things as well. We need not just military people, but people who understand it. And I'm trying fast.
Well,
you understand electricity better than I do.
I understand a lot of the plumbing aspects and the trade stuff, so to say. So I'd be more than happy to look at some of those pictures and concepts and go over them, because it's intriguing.
I'll send you my pre-production report.
No worries.
But
literally, when you just start to look at those layouts, I mean, there's so much intention in those plans. I don't know what the intentions are, but it's screaming of effort and intention. There's something going on there.
It's a very interesting alternative topic to try to work out. And with everything else we know about what's going on in the galaxy and the universe, it's kind of like, I got a feeling this is a very, very old technology that was probably given to us via the Freemasons and others, mystery schools. And it's like, if you're going to fight, here's a great way to do it with your level of technology. Now, once they got into rifled guns and big things that could blow holes through these things, 18 Civil War, all that stuff was antiquated pretty much. But there were a lot of forts in the Civil War that never fell, even with a lot of big guns and artillery. So they had, but the designs are so wacky. I mean, look at Fort Monroe in Newport News, Virginia. I mean, Fort Monroe is this bizarre looking thing. And I'm like, the U.S. Army did that in 1830 or 40? Wow, that's odd. Why didn't they make it, just an octagon? No explanation. Why do you need a bastion? There's a fort in the Florida Keys, Fort Jefferson. It's just an octagon on a partially sunken island with no fresh water. And they said in the history book, pirate suppression. And I'm like, pirate suppression? There's 150 miles between the Florida Keys and Cuba. You can't, it's out of optical range. It makes no sense. And they built it out of brick, but
here's
very bizarre.
Here's an oddball theory that I'll throw out there that I look into, but you'll at least appreciate that it's an oddball angle that I consider. What if there's still a massive population of pirates somewhere running their own situation in a land that we don't know of?
I don't know. But there's certainly a lot of pirates in the world. There are a lot of people doing those slave fishing ships. And his documentary got into why the Somalis had to go out in those little boats and be pirates. They had no choice. They were starving. And you never see that in the Tom Hanks film, as far as I remember. It was just, look how brave this captain, was against these poor Somalis. That was a propaganda film, bar none.
Oh yeah.
All Captain Phillips. If I ever met Tom Hanks, I'd punch his lights out. I really would. And the director and the producer of that film.
I would like to film that.
Huh?
I'd like to film that one. John Warner versus Tom Hanks.
Violence is not an answer, but they deserve that. I mean, it's unconscionable. Here's the white man's view of these bad black Africans.
It is a pretty rough and tumble neighborhood over there that's not doing too well.
Yeah, by design. I have a friend who's been in Somalia and seen the carnage there. He's a film guy,
Mhm.
and I should have gone with him. I really should have. It's just these wars, these petty wars, what they used to call in the old days petite guerre. You know, small wars. These, you know, they keep them on the boil. You know,
Oh, I've heard that. I've
bullshit.
heard that before, actually. I was taught that in school, petite guerre.
Yeah. It's, you know, it's, we call it guerrilla war and other names now, but at the Revolutionary War times, you know, and it's like they keep these little wars on the boil all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely. It's like just like how the CIA runs with these little sleeper cells in the country.
Yeah.
You know, they keep things at a certain level until they need to amp it up, and they can just add more energy and resources to it. And then next thing you know, they go, "Oh, we just stopped a terrorist." What do you mean you just stopped a terrorist? Oh, well, we arrested him because he was going to blow up a building. He was going to blow up a building? Well, he wasn't really going to blow up a building because we sold him a fake bomb. So he thought he was going to blow up a building, but he wasn't really going to hurt anyone because he's just a guy that we were keeping an eye on. So, and then look, so in reality, we don't really actually have terrorists anywhere. We just have CIA operatives that get put to action when they're low on funding.
Yeah, or they recruit people to do it. I mean, look at 9/11. Three guys with box cutters. Come on, you and I would have gotten up there, and we might have gotten cut, but we got to subdue that guy. That was a
the blink of an eye. Yeah. That's such a farce, and I get that the time period is different now. I think everybody would very rapidly crush someone for standing up on a plane and causing trouble. But I don't believe that in that environment that one or three people would have been able to get that far at all. Yeah, you're right. There's no way someone's going to be on my plane and take it over with simply box cutters. I might die in the process. But the plane's not getting taken over. I'll be bleeding to death, a slow death on the floor from box cutter wounds.
Yeah, a Marine Corps K-bar knife is 10 times as effective as a box cutter.
I would actually be so agitated to get into that fight because I know it would be a whole bunch of little cuts that would get me really mad. I don't like getting cut to begin with.
No, I mean, you know, and they sold us that story that the plane over Pennsylvania, all the people were like, yeah, let's roll. Come on, everyone. And they overpowered them, but the plane still crashed in.
Oh, remember that farce?
Insufficient crash debris.
Insufficient insufficient ability to make a phone call at that altitude and speed, too. That was a big sham.
Big scam.
Let's roll.
Yeah, I talked to two guys in the airline business. I said, you know, that crash debris in the Pentagon and also in Pennsylvania, and they were like, we know, no one will listen to us. It's insufficient debris.
Right.
And they never showed us a body, I don't think. And it was the biggest false flag hatchet job I ever, you know. I knew it was a scam by 2003 when there's a picture of my dad walking with Cheney and Rumsfeld in front of the Pentagon, the big hole. And I thought, my God, you know.
My father was one of the first responders. My father was one of the first responders to the Avianca plane crash on Long Island.
You're kidding.
Serious. My father was one of the first responders to show up to that crash site. He got stuck there for days because it was such a cluster F that because his vehicle was one of the first ones there and the way the roads were and everything just was packing in, he couldn't egress. Like literally, he physically couldn't get his car out for a couple of days. He was like stuck there. But he was one of the first people on the scene, and it was a plane crash. I mean, there was bodies, there's debris, there's all kinds of stuff. And that was not present for the Pentagon. It was not present for that other flight that went down in the field. Was it 93 in the field? I mean, it's just...
Flight 800, you know, people saw a missile, Stinger or something.
Oh, I'm sorry. Avianca flight. It's a different one from the...
I know.
TWA 800 was different. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I understand.
Okay.
I was mentioning that just, you know, we don't get the truth on frickin' anything. I mean, we just don't.
There were so many witnesses that saw the missile hit TWA Flight 800 on the shore of Long Island. The beaches were jam-packed.
You know, I understand the news media is wholly corrupt and the people just go to the news for information and they don't believe any of us conspiracy theorists. I understand that. It's a really good program of secrecy on one hand. and it's a shittiest program on the other. Everyone knows all the dirty laundry, pretty much. I mean, how much more is going to come out? You know, that they traded all our polar bears for military technology. What a crime. I mean, I don't know how much it's going to get worse from what we've got now. It's just a matter of some people being able to rise to the occasion to at least consider that, all the hard stuff. Because history always turns out worse than they tell us. Always. All the books on World War II, they're all antiquated. Nobody uses them. The ones from the 40s and 50s, they're just done. Everyone's like, oh, you should read this great book by this guy in 55. He understood the Nazi SS. And I'm like, I just read a book by this woman, Jacobson, and nothing new. No new tidbits. No, not even, you know.
Was it the one by
box stuff?
Annie Jacobson?
Yeah.
I've seen a bunch of her info. I mean, she's accurate. She's accurate.
Yeah.
She's done the research. She's right. But it's not
talking about the Nazi Bell or the Thule Society or the Vril Society at all. You know, I have to finish it. I only read half of it, but I just couldn't bring myself to read.
I read she's accurate about the stuff on the OSS and what happened there and transition the people over.
But it's the safe.
Correct. Right. Correct, because she doesn't less. So it's a starting point because she's accurate, but then people need to understand what it means now when you have folks like Galen coming over here and all of these sinister sons of guns.
I went to the book signing event here in DC with her on that book, and I said, you know, I'm writing a book about this, and what do you think of the Tulip Society, Hans Klammer? She's like, you know, that's not mine. And I said, well, he was an SS general, and she's like, well, he was a contractor, and you know, and that's it. None of the sexy stuff, you know. Sadly, it's a terrible word to use for that, but it's true. None of the sexy conspiracy stuff at all. She's another.
She's probably very much a margin
publisher that's publishing more interesting tidbits that are new. Some of them are new, but they're all approved.
I was just going to say she's probably being handed her books like I would suggest Tom Clancy was.
Yeah.
I mean, The Hunt for Red October was not a fictional story written by Tom Clancy. It was a story handed to him.
Yeah.
So now what do we do with the rest of his books? Do we know them to be fact or fiction?
Well, a mixture of both.
How do we know? Because I was taught that The Hunt for Red October was a true story that was handed to him. So how do I know from my experience to take anything that was written by him as anything other than what I know to be true in another direction?
It could be. I mean, the Red October story is interesting, but that's not a lot of big deal on an electromagnetic,
Well, the fact that it was the fact that the story was truth and presented as fiction, and then he gets the title of being an author. I mean, there's a lot to consider right there before we even get into the technology of what is the Red October.
Yeah, wasn't he murdered? Theory going around.
I'm not 100% sure what happened to Tom Clancy
either, but I think he was starting to flap his gums about some of this. What was
maybe possible.
Yeah, and
which would then add to more of the veracity of his books being truth based.
Yeah, I mean, I read Red October. I thought it was interesting, but it's like,
Well, when you start getting into conversations of Tic Tacs and things like that, you can't negate the fact that he has an MHD drive in the boat, and that
the Russians came out with something and made it work, and we couldn't make it work. Big deal. They have a lot of creative scientists like Tupolev and all these people that think way out of the box. And so American and British were more conservative, just like World War II. We were way behind the Germans. There's a conservative command culture. And so,
understood, and that you have to understand that the story itself is presented as conservative. How do you know the Red October is not a Tic Tac? When they're saying that we have a new drive in it,
well, if they
use the MHD drive,
if they were using an electromagnetic drive, they were obviously had a 0-point energy generator, which I think we've been using on subs for 30, 40 years.
Totally understood.
A lot safer, more power, but it also creates an electromagnetic bubble around the sub, which can reduce drag to a huge amount theoretically. And so
there's a lot of more theory that can be applied to that theory, is that it could do more than just reduce drag. It would allow it to provide anti-grav.
Right. So what I think,
Tic Tac.
What I think.
What if you painted a submarine white? and got it to float in the air, what would the reports say? If you didn't need to have the props on the outside and you didn't need to have the tower for a periscope, if you only needed the hull portion, is a Tic Tac not a submarine?
Absolutely. They can go underwater because the same thing, the space-time bubble.
Right.
I wrote about this in Little Anton before I heard John Lear talk about the D.D hull technology. I just pieced it together from the idea of a UFO. If you have a bubble around you, it doesn't matter if it's water, space, plasma, gas, you can go through anything.
Yep.
And so what I think the Russians caught on, maybe, is probably in the late 70s, not the 80s, but the late 70s. They made that work so that not only was the sub silent, but it was fast underwater. And we had problems catching them. So they basically created a very crude underwater UFO in a sense of how, the basic electromagnetic Nazi Bell technology works, which is an electrified bubble, a plasma bubble around the ship, which theoretically there is no drag.
Right.
Not much.
Yep.
Now,
this is what we're seeing this is the same technology that just came out in the Salvatore Pais patents, which shows that the electrification of the hull causing this plasmatic effect in aeronautics creates a vacuum. So you're actually dragging the ship through space instead of thrusting it because you're creating a vacuum in front of it.
Right. I mean, this is what they've been doing. I've heard stories from Navy people that they put all the crew in their quarters, and then in the middle of the night, they jack up the speed of an aircraft carrier, and then, only approved, people up top that have signed a national security agreement understand what's going on. They're going like 80 knots, maybe, and then they slow down before the crew wakes up at, 5 bells, and they slow back down to 25 knots. It's something maybe like that. It's people like, oh, they never, and it's like, no, you don't understand. Military personnel are not going to flap their gums about that. And even if they did, who would believe them?
Right.
Oh, our carrier can go 90 knots. I don't believe you.
Right.
How did they
do
you
get from people?
I don't know, but
there's so many truths that can't be proven in a conversational basis, and it's annoying sometimes when people actually do that. Like, oh, prove it.
I can't prove anything. You can't even prove.
Yeah, what do you want me to prove to you right now about anything in the world?
Yeah. The people who do that are very small-minded. It's like, prove anything.
Scientifically, you can't prove that you're having a conversation with me right now.
Nope.
It's scientifically impossible to prove that. But it is what it is. You're right. Small-minded people need massive proofs.
Yeah. I mean, no offense to anyone out there. I understand people are just limited.
I understand an inquiring mind, but at some point you have to open the door to possibility of something being different than your previous position.
Yeah, and I think the human race has been dumbed down by design, so I don't think it's people's fault.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that there's a massive system that's trying to get people to not ask questions and to accept answers.
Well, they screwed up by making the internet. It started out as a military-only technology, DARPANET, and either it got out of hand. I believe that it's protected by human and ET alike. They need it for communications and other things. But what they do is they just muddy the waters more and more and more and more and more and more. And it only works to a certain point. Because otherwise, it hasn't been a fast growth. But in the last 30 years, I have seen just normal people wake up to some tiny truth, the Nimitz thing and others. And, they're finally, their minds are opening up. But I still think we're going to be in the vast minority, even in 20 years. I think if we're lucky, we'll get that magic 5% number, which is really all we need. That's a whole nother story about that, but that's, I think Penny mentions that, the 5%, but I hope it's all we need, I
hope we can get there fast.
Yep.
Well, with that, John, let's wrap this one up for today. And I'm going to suggest to the audience, if they could all rise to the occasion and elevate your minds, because we need this nowadays. Ask the questions and Share your truths. Don't hide them. Because this is how we're all going to get through this, is by everybody bringing their truth to the table and allowing others to experience it instead of hiding everything in the shadows. But John, thank you very much for coming today. I always appreciate it. We've covered so many topics today. I don't know that we'll have anything to talk about next time, but we'll figure something out.
We'll find something. We forgot about talk about cars.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, cars of the future will be a good one. But all right, John. Thank you very much.
Carburetors that work on water.
Yeah, cars that work on water. They happen too.
Yep.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Like, subscribe, share. Go to the website, deciphering.tv. I really appreciate it. Thank you, John. Have a great day.
Bye. See you next time.